forgot. Sorry. I would like to call this meeting to order, a special board meeting of Monday, May 1st. We just have one recommended action on the agenda. But at first, as a settler and in spirit of truth and reconciliation, I would like to give the land acknowledgement. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territories of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nations. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, learn, and live. Do we have any declarations of interest? Seeing none, there's no declarations of interest stated at this time. Moving on to the adoption of the agenda as distributed. A motion to that. Trustee Morton, Trustee Cunningham, all those in favor? Opposed? The agenda is carried as distributed. We have one recommended action, and that is, I will pass it on to Trustee Cunningham to speak to the recommendation, the adoption of resolutions to Committee of the Whole.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, I move that the board now adopt the resolution and approve the actions of the May 1st, 2023 in-camera standing committee meeting.
Thank you. We have Emma Kennedy as seconder, Trustee Thatcher. All those in favor? Opposed? That motion carries. As that is the end of our agenda, I call this a special board meeting of May 1st adjourned. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to the Standing Committee meeting of May 1st, 2023. I'd like to call this meeting to order and begin with the land acknowledgement. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, learn, and live. Are there any declarations of interest this evening? Seeing none, there are no declarations of interest. Could I have a motion and seconder, please, to approve the agenda? Trustee Brown and Trustee Linton. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none. We will now be moving to agenda item 5, community presentations. The Durham District School Board welcomes presentations by individuals and groups at standing committee meetings, and tonight we have 2 presentations. The board's bylaws on public presentations state that presenters shall be limited to speaking not more than 15 minutes, including time for questions. We ask presenters to limit the presentation to 5 minutes to allow time for questions. Should a presentation reach the 10-minute mark, the presenter will be notified by a staff member and will be requested to conclude the presentation. Presenters are requested to focus their presentation on the topic outlined in their application to present at tonight's meeting. The committee will not debate the topic of any presentation. I would like to welcome Lindsay Elizabeth LeBlanc, who will be presenting on the topic of Inclusive Initiative Committee. Lindsay, just a couple of things. If you just press that button at the front of your mic, it'll turn green. And in a moment, I'll activate it, and when it's red, then you can speak. So, Lindsay, once you've finished your presentation, trustees will be permitted to ask questions of clarification. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Definition of inclusive, similar to all-in or all-included, including or covering all services, not excluding any of the parties or groups involved in something. Example, only an inclusive peace process will end the conflict. Good evening. I would like to start out by giving thanks for allowing myself the opportunity to speak here tonight. My name is Lindsay. I am a former DDSB employee, small business owner, advocate, and supporter for a diverse range of communities and groups within the Durham region. I am also a single mother of a 15-year-old daughter. It has been brought to my attention over the last few years that DDSB has failed to execute and meet their core mission, values, goals, and strategic plans in terms of inclusion. Parents, guardians, trustees, employees, and community members are being silenced. Questions are going unanswered, concerns and frustrations are being ignored and growing exponentially. These are just a few examples of DDSB not representing the term inclusive. The time for real, strategic, inclusive action is now. Durham District School Board's current strategic plan reads as follows. Success, we value your achievements. Well-being, we value how you feel. Leadership, we value how you grow. Equity, we value who you are. Engagement, we value your involvement. And innovation, we value forward thinking. To my observations and networking within communities, it is apparent that these current plans are not being met nor followed. Our children cannot afford any more anguish. They are suffering immensely. It is truly heart-wrenching. In my community alone, I cannot speak on one child who is not suffering to some degree. This is a serious SOS in my opinion. I would like to put forth a proposal. The immediate formation of an inclusive community involvement committee, to be named Inclusive Initiative Committee. Anyone is welcome, everyone is included, and diversity is valued. I believe the formation of this committee could be life-saving. My vision for the purpose of this proposed committee is to network individual school committees, communities. Everyone gets involved and included in some way, shape, or form. We will work together to determine root problems, conflicts, and successes within the individual school communities, while also working together to source immediate, inclusive, sustainable solutions for all students, staff, families, and their communities within the umbrella of DDSB. As requested, to give everyone a bit of a visual of what this will look like to start, the committee will start hosting community nights. We will obtain permits to open up the school gyms and invite community to come, be involved, and included. Along with students, parents, guardians, residents, and staff, we will also invite organizations, groups, businesses, and farmers to come with presentations to educate and engage with our community about resources and services they offer that can help ensure our communities and schools will be inclusive and sustainable. In my opinion, the Board of Education was formed based on serving our children through the tax-paying citizens of Durham Region. I acknowledge and understand that the curriculum comes down the pipeline from the Ontario government. We, all of us included, are responsible for the materials and agendas going out to our children. We don't and can't control what's coming down from the top. However, we need to be accountable and responsible inclusively for our immediate communities, how we care for those communities, and what we put in to ensure their sustainability through all aspects of life. It is up to us. The term community has never been more important than it is now. There's a long history of abuse of power here. We are responsible for making an inclusive change. This will ensure our very homes, families, and communities will be sustainable through all aspects of life going forward. I would like to thank you again for your time and attention this evening. I will remain dedicated through passion and purpose to ensure the success of this committee, and I very much look forward to our future conversations. And just for the record, we go all in, peacefully, respectfully, and inclusively.
Do any trustees have questions of clarification arising out of the presentation? And I'm seeing no questions. Lindsay, I'd like to thank you for your presentation this evening. So I would now like to welcome Siraj Patel, representing the Islamic Center of Oshawa, who will be presenting on the topic of creating a safe learning environment for students of all backgrounds. Siraj will be joining us virtually tonight, so that may take a moment.
Good evening. Yep, just give me a second here. Can you guys hear me?
Siraj, once you finish your presentation, trustees will be permitted to ask questions of clarification. So please go ahead whenever you're ready.
Sure. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Okay, so again, as you introduced me, my name is Siraj Patel. I'm the president of the Islamic Center of Oshawa. And what I want to speak to today is a bit of a situation that we're seeing within our community, especially on the children that are coming to the mosque, in the sense that there are certain types of beliefs which are being taught within the school system, and our children really have no option of opting out of being taught these beliefs. And these beliefs tend to be in complete contradiction of what's being taught to them at home, in many sense, what the faith ascribes to. And we're seeing that in the form of ceremonies, flags, books, signages that are being displayed throughout the school, on the flagpoles, in the playgrounds. And so our children, what I'm finding over the last few years, are coming to us not feeling safe in the space that they're supposed to feel safe in, which is their school ground, right? In the sense that, you know, when they see signages that are indicating that it's a safe space, yet that sort of is in contradiction to the belief system that they ascribe to, inadvertently they're taking away a message that they're a danger to people, that they're bad people, which is not. I don't predict that to be the sort of message that's intended to be given to the children, but nonetheless, that's what they're walking away with, right? So, I mean, that's something that we're seeing constantly happen within the children that are attending the public school system. And again, that's completely untrue, right? People of faith do not hate anybody. They don't wish to display a phobia towards anybody, but the message that's being dictated to them or conveyed to them is that they are a threat to people, that they are a danger to society or danger to fellow students for having a certain belief system. And at the same time, you know, there's consequences to this in the sense that they're walking away and coming to the mosque looking for help, looking for reasoning behind what's going on within the school system. And whenever parents were finding approached teachers, principals, they seem to constantly be told that there's nothing that can be done about it because what they're asking for, the accommodation that they're requesting, is in violation of the Human Rights Code. I think teachers and principals are being unfairly put in positions to say this. They're not qualified to make this type of determination. They're not trained properly to make that type of declaration. And yet it seems to be the party line that anytime a child is asking for, a family is asking for accommodations on certain subject areas or certain assemblies or certain sort of subject matters, they're being presented with this option of you either take it or leave it because it is a human rights code violation. So what we're finding within the community is that many families are starting to opt out of the public education system and starting to homeschool their children. This is becoming a trend, a growing trend, and it's growing exponentially. And it's all based on one thing, is the fact that a child is being forced to choose between their beliefs in terms of their religion and some of the messaging that's coming out of their classrooms and in their schools. So really, I mean, it sort of echoes upon the latest revision that we've seen to the proposal to the revision to the Consolidated Bylaw 51315, in the sense that, you know, from what I'm understanding is that anything that's perceived to be a violation to the Human Rights Code is not going to be allowed in terms of questioning. Now, the question here arises that who within the Board of Trustees is an expert on human rights? More times than not, what I've found at the school level or even at the board level is people aren't qualified to make that determination. Now, to make that determination on the fly when somebody's presenting a question, it seems rather open to bias and a person's personal preference as to what qualifies as a human rights code violation and what doesn't. And essentially what could potentially happen is that all conversation around certain subject areas become stonewalled, or it becomes stymied, such that nobody has any recourse to speak up and present their side or their sort of viewpoints on a subject matter. When in reality, it's important to keep those lines of conversation open. And I've explained to you why, right, earlier, in the sense that there is a direct conflict that often takes place between people's personal beliefs, what's being taught to them within their homes or their religion, and rightfully so, and the communication that's coming out of the schools. So I just really wanted to make the trustees aware of the situation that we're seeing. And I think a lot of faith-based communities are probably seeing a similar sort of situation within their communities, in the sense that this sort of tension is existing within the students, which is creating this environment which are no longer feeling comfortable. And as a result, you're seeing students and families sort of disengaging from the school itself, or even choosing to leave the public school system altogether. So I'll leave it at that.
any trustees have questions of clarification arising out of the presentation? And I'm seeing none. Siraj, thank you very much for your presentation this evening. Before we begin the Durham District School Board presentations, I would just like to remind staff that we have a robust agenda this evening, and that although I will not be watching the clock, I'm just asking for respect with regards to the 4-minute, 2-minute bylaw. If there are questions that we're not able to fit in this evening, we'll make arrangements to send those questions directly to staff via email, and also that the response to those questions be brought forward at a public meeting so that we're all on the same page. So I'm going to move then to Superintendent Margaret Lazarus to present the graduation coach for Black students report or presentation. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Thatcher. The report can be found on pages 1 to 5 of your board package. The purpose of this report is to provide trustees with an overview of the Durham District School Board's graduation coach program for Black students and evidence of the impact on students accessing this program. The DDSB data from the 2019 student census indicated that our current education system imposes barriers that disproportionately and negatively impact students who identify as Black. These students are experiencing school differently. They are struggling academically more than white and South Asian students. They endure a higher proportion of suspension, and fewer Black students graduate from high school in the 4 years compared with white and South Asian students. This program is one of the actions that DDSB has undertaken to be responsive to the census data. Our work, as always, is centered on the students and the communities we serve. This evening's presentation will focus on the intended impact that the graduation coaches are having on Black students in the program. So please join me in welcoming Alicia Russell, the principal of Ajax High School and the program lead, Trisha Brown, Brian Elrington, and Dwayne Duke, graduation coaches, Millicent Harley, parent of a student accessing the program, and 3 grade 12 students, Demari Constable, Ajax High School, Michaela Kovacs from GL Roberts, and Michael Hunt Bowen from Sinclair Secondary School.
Thank you, Superintendent Lazarus. The DDSB Graduation Coach for Black Student Program is guided by the ministry mandate to provide intensive, culturally responsive programming to support students and improve their academic achievement and well-being. Our coaches work alongside our students and school community to help identify systemic barriers to a welcoming and positive school learning environment, establish trusting relationships with Black students, families, and communities, and transform school culture. Today, we are sharing with you evidence of impact as we near the end of year 2 in our program.
Good evening, my name is Dwayne Duke. Increasing the sense of belonging of students, that's what we work on for the evidence of our impact. One of the ways that we increase the sense of belonging in our schools is by establishing Black student unions, peer leadership groups as well. 100% of our schools that we work with have these spaces for our Black students. In addition to increasing the sense of belonging through the culturally responsive programming, the DRAPE program is a program currently being led in the DDSB for its first year of the cohort at Pickering High, J. Clark, and also Ajax High School. Ajax High School. The students will have access to various different mentors and also workshops to boost their knowledge in the field of STEM, from soft skills, digital literacy, and also Google. The town of Ajax, the hub, and also Ajax High School came together to collaborate an excellent way for students to be able to develop life skills while exploring 2 unique opportunities through a program called Barber and Beats. Cutting hair and teaching students how to become entrepreneurs by developing their skills, by showing them they can build their own business their own way. Within the 12 weeks, students are able to Within the 12 weeks, students are able to have one-on-one mentorships with the barbers and teach the students the importance of attention to details, hygiene, by teaching them how to cut and provide lineups. Communication with others and time management is also learned in the process. But most importantly, it creates pride in their identity by allowing them to have their better connection with their hair, which is something we all know, which is very personal to us. As well as to be proud of our new skills that they have learned in the program, Damari Constable from Ajax High, who is in grade 12, will be sharing us the DDSB graduation cultural that has made an impact in his life. Please give a round of applause to Damari Constable.
Good evening, my name is Damari Constable, and from kindergarten to grade 10, I have never spoken to any of my present or past teachers about any problems I have had in their classes. But in my grade 11 year, I was introduced to a gentleman named Mr. Duke, or as you guys know him as Dwayne Duke, who would help guide me to become a better person. Right now in English, I'm not doing too well, and a regular student who would probably be not doing well in the class would go talk to their teacher about their grade, but not me. I would decide to do nothing about it. And then one day, I grew a connection of trust, which makes me feel comfortable talking to Mr. Duke about my class issues. After our conversation, the next day I went to speak to my English teacher about my grade and the rest of the curriculum to see how much work there is that I can help boost up my mark to my comfort. Since I did that, every once in a while, I book meetings with my teacher to speak to her and to get help. To tell you the honest truth, I don't know what would have happened if I was never introduced to Mr. Duke, because knowing me, I wouldn't have spoken to my teacher, so I would like to thank Mr. Duke for helping me come out of my comfort zone and face my fear of mine. I also would like to thank Mr. Duke for introducing me to the DRAPE program. I'll tell you all when I first heard about the DRAPE program, one of the things I took from Mr. Duke explaining it to us was about the money we'd be receiving from the program. But when I took time to look at the papers, my interest for the money became less, and I grew different interests for the business analytics course and the mentor and mentee part of the program. In the future, I'd like to become a very successful accountant, and I believe with the help of the mini workshops, business analytics course, and the mentorship, I can awaken the path of my future of being a very successful accountant. So I once again would like to say thank you to Mr. Duke for helping with my stubborn stand of not talking to my teachers, and for also introducing me to the DRAPE program.
Thank you, Dwayne. Thank you, Tamari. Wonderful story. Good evening, friends. My name is Brian Elrington, and I'm a graduation coach with Sinclair Secondary and GL Roberts. As graduation coaches for Black students, we have been able to successfully leverage each learner's innate curiosity and desire to build capacity to evaluate their options, make the right decisions about their future, and to make their decisions right. Now is the time of year that our students are beginning to receive their conditional offers from their post-secondary institutions, and we are working with them to ensure that we make the best of this time, the calm before the storm. We are mindful of the fact that we're actually not out of the woods just yet. We are mindful that now, more than ever, Black students and their families need all of our support and continued support, and that if each learner is going to thrive. Going forward, everyone knows that we must push a little harder during this critical period. This means connecting with post-secondary academic advisors to begin having those initial pathway exploration conversations and to start creating a more personalized pathway plan for our students, thus ensuring that each student is not just beginning their post-secondary journey on track. They're actually beginning on a track that was created specifically for them, a track that leads to improved outcomes and better overall well-being. Last year, the same time, we told you, or I was fortunate enough to tell you about some of our successful campaign or campus tour initiatives. Last year, this time, when we were together, you may remember me telling you about 4 students that we started with coming to Centennial College. And by the time we had finished the campus tour initiative, we ended with about 81 students. Well, this year, March break 2023, we began that campus tour initiative with 20 students. And so we are looking forward to a very robust season of visiting post-secondary institutions. Following the tour we had over March break, 10 grade 9 students approached me immediately to ask if we could go on another campus tour. In that moment, of course, I said yes and proposed that the students work together to conduct some research and organize the tour. And to their credit, the students conducted research. They met with their teachers who support the Black Students Association and Black Studies course, and eventually decided on a June 14th tour to Queen's University. The last time I was here, I was also, at the time actually, I wanted to tell you about one learner who was currently completing an application to the University College Cork in Ireland, but I had to be mindful of the time. So to get around that, I decided to actually bring the student with me tonight to tell you about it. And also I've brought another student, Michael Hunt Bowen, to talk to you about his experience on the campus tours and how that has impacted him and his pathway. So Michael, I'll start with you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Hunt Bowen. I am a student attending the neighboring building of St. Clair Secondary School. I'm currently in grade 12, which means I've already applied to the universities that I intend to go to, but I don't think I would have been in this place that I am right now if it wasn't for Brian. I initially got in touch with him around this July of last year, and he got in touch with my mother. And then when I was speaking to him, I recall he asked me if I know what a supercurricular is. I'd never heard that word before, so I asked him, don't you mean extracurriculars? And then he explained to me that a supercurricular is like sort of a self-directed learning that you can do. He gave me ideas that I could go to the library to sign out books related to the career choice that I want to go into. He taught me to reach out to clinics in my community to see if I could shadow a doctor or something like that, as I intend to pursue a career in health sciences. And then throughout the summer of last year and then going into the fall and the spring, he took us on campus tours to some of the universities that we saw was McMaster's, Queen's, we went to Centennial College, University of Toronto, and he kind of like, in a way, like these tours, it kind of helped me to decide like where I'd want to go in the future and things like that. And then he's continued to stay in touch with me going back to like when I was at school. Like we'd have scheduled meetings where he would check in on me and see if I was doing well in my classes and things like that. And I just feel like this whole program as a whole, it kind of guided me to like where I am right now and helped me find like what career path I want to go into and where I want to be in life and things like that. I did, yeah.
Which universities?
The universities I applied to were McMaster's, Trent, Queen's, Western, UOIT, and UFT. And a lot of those universities I like didn't really know anything about prior to like visiting the schools. I didn't really look at it as like a step-by-step process. I kind of looked at it like I just applied to wherever and then like I go from there. I didn't like look at it as like an end goal that I need to work towards. And Brian kind of like guided me through those steps and things like that.
Thank you, Michael. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tricia Brown, and over the past year, students have been presented more than a dozen opportunities to increase their understanding of Black excellence through different activities and events. So just to mention a few, in October, students got the opportunity to meet motivational speaker Jeff Martin. Jeff is one of the highest booked diversity and inclusion school speakers in Canada. He came and shared powerful messages of resiliency, determination, unity, and the importance of striving for excellence. Over 50 students listened intently to his messages about character building, persistence, aspiration, and legacy, which was both inspiring and affirming of the Black identity. And for Black History Month, we hosted a panel discussion called SOAR, Sisters Overcoming, Achieving, and Rising. This was in celebration of the achievements and excellence of 7 Black Canadian females who were nominated for the 2022 Top 100 Black Women in Canada Award. This event was moderated by 4 Black female students, and with almost 100 students in attendance, the panelists spoke about self-worth, overcoming obstacles, and pushing through to reach success in spite of racism. The panelists' inspiring and authentic discussions left students feeling uplifted and empowered. And in March, the University of Toronto hosted a Reach Ahead Kinesiology March Break program for Black students in grades 10 and 11. They got to spend a week immersed at the University of Toronto to experience what it's like to be a student at the Faculty of Kinesiology and Physical Education. There were 25 spots available that included overnight accommodations and all meals. And I had the pleasure of hearing from one of my students who was one of the 25 students chosen. She came back and told me how amazing the experience was and how grateful she was for the opportunity. She said she left with more knowledge of the program, great connections, and a feeling of confidence, with U of T's kinesiology program now being her #1 pick for post-secondary. Now this summer, we have partnered with the RISE program. REACH includes Support and Elevate at Durham College to provide 50 Black students the opportunity to attend a 4-day post-secondary readiness program at their Oshawa campus. Staff will engage with the students through sports and games, spend time discussing student services and supports, provide program tours in AI, computer science, business, and several more programs, along with discussions around mental wellness for their post-secondary journey. So now I would like to introduce to you a parent that I've had the pleasure of meeting. I would like to introduce Millicent Harley, the mother of Kezia Harley, who is a grade 12 student at Pine Ridge Secondary School. Kezia has been accepted into the fashion program at Seneca College for September. So.
Good evening, I'm Millicent Harley. My daughter Kezia is in grade 12. She is different from most of the students. She did her own research. She knew what program she wanted to be in. What we didn't have was any information on how we're going to pay for college, and she looked up some research. When I met Miss Brown at one of the meetings at Pine Ridge and learned about the coaches and asked questions. My daughter was on an IEP from she started kindergarten. And I found out all of the information I'm gonna need to get her IEP carried over to the university, what she need. And I tried to get her to advocate for herself, because I keep telling her, when you get to college or university, you're gonna have to do that on your own. So she's been communicating with Miss Brown, who has helped her tremendously to apply to college, to get into the college she wanted to go into, to start the registration process for OSAP, as well as the other things that she needed to go in, and she did it all on her own with just my support. I had her go to Miss Brown herself, tell her what she need, show her, her work, and Miss Brown has been amazing. So I hope this program continues and you guys don't take it away, because it's needed. I had 2 other kids graduate from Pine Ridge, and we never had that. And I had no idea about scholarships and all that, even though there's a whole section of their website that lists all of the scholarship. I didn't know, because I never looked. Ms. Brown got me to do that. So cheers to this program, and I hope you guys keep it going.
To conclude our presentation for this evening, we have one video that summarizes the evidence of impact as we end year 2.
Someone. It helped me to set goals, increase my engagement, because when the DDSB graduation coach for Black students, it helped to increase my engagement because when I was working along with someone, it helped me to set goals, and that person would help to keep me accountable with those goals, and they'd always check up with me and make sure that I was sticking to them. One of the goals that I set with my graduation coach was to get better in math. We started off by setting specific times that we wanted to practice math. So I would practice in the morning, or sometimes at lunch there would be a math help that I would go to, and there I'd receive help and guidance from other teachers who specialized in math, and I was able to overcome that obstacle.
Working with the DDSB graduation coach increased my school engagement by just having her door be open all the time. I was able to make more connections with people that I wouldn't have even thought that I would make connections with before.
The DDSB graduation coach helped to increase my sense of belonging because he helped me to feel more like a student who had a future. After school, we would go to these study halls where I'd encounter other Black youth who are also trying to apply and get into university. During these study groups, the coach was able to help me along with the application process and show me the requirements and things I needed to get into the programs I wanted. And then, after I understood everything, after we went through the application process, I was able to submit and apply to 3 very good programs.
I remember when I first entered a normal guidance counselor office, they weren't really sure on how to deal with my situation. I was confused choosing between college and university, and there was so much uncertainty in the situation. But working with the DDSB graduation coach showed me all the options that I had in front of me. They showed me all the college options that I had, all the financial options that I had, social options as well, just trying to build up a foundation that would make me successful in post-secondary. My coach helped me overcome financial barriers that were obstacles to me attending university, and it was a huge anxiety to me, but she helped alleviate that anxiety, helped me find pathways so that I can actually be where I am right now. I wholeheartedly stand behind putting graduation coaches in every DDSB school. The ways that she has helped me personally, and the ways I have known that she's helped other people personally, I feel every student needs someone like that on their side.
Thank you again for your time, and we so look forward to being able to share our journey in a year from now, and the next year, and the next year, and the next year. Thank you again on behalf of the graduation coach team and the parents. Thank you, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Wondering if we have any comments or questions from trustees. Go ahead, Ben.
Thank you, Chair.
Student trustee Ben Cameron.
I saw in the report that funding for the grad coaches are supposed to end in, oh my goodness, I think 2025 was the date. I'm wondering if it's the intention to continue funding afterwards, even if we don't get that funding from the ministry, and if we might be looking at also expanding to more or even all schools.
Yep. You can answer. The chair recognizes Director Williams.
Thank you, through you, Chair and Trustee Cameron. That's not a question that we're really in a position to respond to at the moment. Fortunately, we continue to receive the funding, and we certainly recognize the value of the impact that the experience has had. And so when we're looking out several years, what we're hoping is that a part of the commitment is building capacity as well around particular strategies that do target the needs of particular groups of students. Mentioned in the report is we do recognize that we have also a focus on graduation outcomes for Indigenous students, and so we know that we need to build forward. So from the point of view of continuing to fund, I do think that as the context's changed, I can't answer the question categorically, but what I can say is that we recognize that there is a value and there is an absolute need to serve in this way.
Thank you, Director. The chair recognizes Trustee Linton.
Thank you. I'm sitting here beaming with pride because, and I feel I'm on the wrong side of the podium, that I should be right there speaking about the success of the program. And to be honest, I should be also advocating for inclusive programs as well, because they're important and we need to see them. So, but my daughter is a product of the program. So young men, I hope you go to Western University. And if you do, I've got someone who can give you a personal tour. And one of the success coach can get you a Western sweater. So thank you, Ms. Brown. But again, to kind of Trustee Cameron's question, the importance of embedding these types of programs into the system, because we're talking about end dates. So at this point, we're challenging ourselves to say that we've got to have it fixed by 2024 and 2025. And that is a steep task because we continue to see these challenges. Again, the presentations that we've heard earlier on speak to the challenges of community feeling included and being part of this system. So we've got to do better than we're doing now. But I also want to, and maybe not for now, this is going to be a motion coming, so I'm going to warn you, there's going to be a motion around expansion of this program, because a couple of weeks ago, we had elementary students speaking about their transition. And so I'd like to see us expanding for this type of program to go into elementary schools to support grade 7 and 8 students transitioning into high school, and some of the stuff that they're going to see and how they have to navigate grade 9 and 10 even before entering 11 and 12, and having the opportunity to grasp hold of some of these opportunities. So yeah, just to say thank you for the presentation. Thank you, young people, for coming out. It's not easy to give these presentations, but for speaking wholeheartedly. We've got to do better, though, because we can't lose these type of graduation coats. Mom, again, me and you could switch places, because my daughter had the exact same experience. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Trustee Linton. And the chair recognizes Trustee Pinillo.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, I have to echo everything that Trustee Linton said, but also send a huge thank you to all of you for being here tonight, but also for all the work that has gone into this. And I hope that this is a moment where you just stand in your greatness, whether you are a student or a staff or a family member or a community who has come and surrounded this program with love and care and executed it every single day. Looking back at my own experience, it would have been something that I truly think would have saved a number of my peers and colleagues back in high school who fell through the cracks and had a longer journey than perhaps was necessary, just because they didn't have someone pouring into them in the way that you're pouring into these students. I think my question would be based on, I tend to live by the motto to be the role model that you could have used. So for those students who are here tonight, if I can put you on the spot, if you think about where you are right now in your journey and where you were a year ago, 2 years ago, and how this has played out, if you could support another student who's coming after you, what is something about your process, about this program, that you would maybe change to be different or better for someone who is like you? I'll leave it at that and I'll wait for the answer. If anyone wants to take a crack at it. It's a deep question. I'm sorry. I can give you another minute to think, but the reason I'm asking is because when we're talking about expanding programs and scaling programs, it's important that we learn from what's working, what's not working. Oh, sure. Sure. So looking at your journey, where you were a year ago, even 2 years ago, and then becoming part of this program, what is something about being involved in this program that you might change to improve for a student who's coming after you, who might also become part of this program? In essence, how can you help us grow this program to be better for someone coming behind you? The red light means it's on. Yep.
I know it's something that you guys already mentioned, but maybe like increasing the number of how many teachers or coaches are in this program, because I know at my school personally, Brian is only able to come there on Mondays and Wednesdays, but having somebody there like every day of the week and perhaps like more than one coach, they could like engage with more students, maybe have like some one-on-one sessions with a student rather than like it have to be in a group setting due to like the limited amount of coaches. And I feel like that could further like help students who maybe aren't like as outspoken or like willing to speak up in like a group setting rather than like one-on-one.
Thank you. Thank you, yes. Oh, we have another answer? Oh, Chair, I think we have another respondent to the question.
Sorry. I go?
Yes.
Go ahead. We'll get to
so-
him in a moment.
So with the coaches here, I think that throughout, because I have a couple of friends at school who like aren't doing so well and who like I barely see at school. I'd have to see them like outside of school. But ever since the coaches have came, like with Mr. Duke, I've seen my friend, he's been coming to school way more, and he's actually been going to classes, which I'm proud of for him. And I really think that with Mr. Duke there, he's actually impacting him to come to school, to actually go to class, learn. And if he's not like in class, then Mr. Duke would probably find him and tell him to go to class, and he would end up going to class, which I like seeing him in class and seeing him at school. Because my friend, he's not a dumb kid, he's a smart kid, and I just hate seeing other kids, other black kids who I personally know that are doing like putting themselves down. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Let's go to, you
have
wanted to make a comment?
Yes. I
You
just
go
wanted
first.
to reiterate what the kids said about the coaches, because when Miss Brown started at our school, she was there full-time. And now she's only there, what, 1 day a week? 2 days a week. We need to have more coaches there rather than less coaches. I have additional ones, like what's your name? Dwayne, like they said, hire more coaches, because they're really helping the kids, rather than take away, giving us coaches with one hand and taking them away with the next one, leaving us with 2 days a week instead of 5. We need 5. We need 3 coaches in one school, 5 days a week. That's the aim.
Thanks for that. Trustee Linton?
Sorry, I got so excited that I didn't ask my real question. So I guess, again, as per Trustee Cameron, around the financial implications, it states that the ministry funded 2 positions up until 2025, and a third position funded until 2024. I guess I'm asking about the feasibility of bringing that in line with the 2025 date, and what we need to do to explore that. So I guess additional funding, at least bringing this till 2025, so, and then looking at a strategy for continuous funding. I'll look at Margaret.
I think Trustee Linton is looking at Director Williams-Taylor. Director, did you wish to?
Thank you, through you, Chair. Certainly, we do again recognize the value. I would hate to commit at this point, as we're just doing the analysis of our own GSNs, the implications for the GSNs for the 23-24 school year. I think the question there would be how it is that we might be looking at what we would be funding from our own GSNs from in the next year. But at this time, we're still trying to figure out from the technical papers what the impact of the current allocation is. So I know that CFO would be quite concerned if I made a commitment without having the appropriate assessment of what it is that we can promise. But I do recognize, and I don't want it to be lost on the students and the families and the parent who is here tonight, that we certainly don't take lightly the impact that it has had. Because when we do recognize, to Trustee Pinello's point, there are students who have not been properly served, that we need to consider that if our goal is every kid across the stage, ultimately, that the work that we need to do is to ensure that we differentiate appropriately. That's not always, the answer is not always more money. Sometimes the answer is in how it is that we do adjust the resources that we do have, but that we take lessons learned. And so I think presentations like this are important because, again, clear lessons learned about what happens when there is precise, focused support for students in the way that they need it. And I think that that is something that sharpens our approach with our students who need us in our schools. So no promises, Trustee Linton, but I do want to reassure that we have heard the need, and we need to think about how it is we serve appropriately.
Thank you, Director. Certainly agree with that. I think trustees recognize the benefits of this innovative program and the proven track record. It does indeed respond to the needs of students within our board. Thank you very much for your presentation. No. Moving on to the next presentation around board climate, well-being, and safety, and I'll call on Superintendents Gary Crossdale, Heather Mundy, and Andrea McCauley.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. The purpose of this report is to provide you with information on actions taken that reflect our commitment, our responsibility as duty bearers to ensuring that our schools are safe, welcoming, inclusive, and that they provide respectful working and learning spaces that promote well-being for all students and staff. Students are why we are here. In turn, this drives all that we do to create the everyday conditions for students to thrive and succeed. This happens within a positive school climate. A positive school climate exists when all students, staff, and families feel safe, know that they are valued, know that they have voice, and know that they matter, just as they are. A positive school climate exists when an authentic, caring, and supportive relationships and interactions build connection and guide instruction practices. When opportunities for meaningful student engagement and participation are present in all spaces. When every interaction is grounded in human rights and the principles of equity and inclusion. When a culture of care and mutual respect is cultivated in our learning and working spaces. When these conditions exist, school can be a protective factor for students. That being said, while our schools may be safe and affirming for many students, we acknowledge that that is not the case for all students. To ensure schools are a protective factor for all students, our work needs to be guided by an understanding of who our students are, how they experience their learning environments. This is the proactive work that is necessary to create and sustain a safe, positive school environment, an experience for students and the staff who provide wraparound support.
It is important for students and staff to feel engaged, valued, and connected at school. Towards our schools being protective spaces for students, we have a number of plans in place which work to create identity-affirming, equity-centered, positive school and classroom environments. Creating positive school climates requires that we set the conditions that build connection and promote well-being and safety. How do we do that in a school? We start with what is needed for all students and then recognize that some require more intentional and individualized support. Building relationships is key and foundational to our mental health and well-being action plan. School staff spend time getting to know their students, who they are, what their interests are, how they learn, and how as staff across all roles, can best support them. All of these plans and strategies support understanding the identity of our students and support their well-being and learning. Working towards ensuring that Durham schools are protective factors for students is part of our trauma-informed practices. Trauma-informed practice is the conditions and relationships we intentionally form with and for our students, our families, and each other. Building relationships is the primary condition for positive mental health and well-being, both inside and outside of school, and it is the foundation for trauma-informed work. Using strategies such as those found on the report and provided on this slide help individualize the experience of our students as we move from planning for all students through to those who need more.
Typically, families will inform the school if their child requires additional support. School teams will meet with the family to understand the individualized needs of a student and create plans so that the transition to school is successful. This preparation may involve reviewing individual education plans, behavior safety plans, and/or transition plans. Sometimes the student is new to school, so the process is to gather information through care conferences with the family caregiver to best plan for the student. Based on the information that the school has provided, there may be additional training or support, such as the short-term assistance response team, working alongside school staff in programming to support the student.
The DDSB is committed to providing working and learning environments in which all individuals are treated with respect and dignity. In Ontario, various laws, including the Education Act and the Occupational Health and Safety Act, collectively ensure that school boards provide a safe and productive learning and work environment for both students and employees. Media coverage of violence in schools has been quite prevalent post-pandemic. When a violent incident occurs within a school board, two separate pieces of legislation need to be considered: the Occupational Health and Safety Act and the Education Act. When examining violent incident data, it is important to distinguish between the criteria set out for workplace violent incidents as defined by the Occupational Health and Safety Act and violent incidents as defined under the Education Act. The Occupational Health and Safety Act defines workplace violence as the exercise of physical force by a person against a worker in a workplace and/or an attempt to exercise physical force against a worker in a workplace and/or a statement or behavior that is reasonable for a worker to interpret as a threat to exercise physical force against a worker in a workplace. Under the Education Act, the term violent incident is defined as the occurrence of or the occurrence of a combination of any of the following: possessing a weapon, including possessing a firearm, physical assault causing bodily harm, requiring medical attention, sexual assault, robbery, using a weapon to cause or threaten bodily harm to another person, extortion, and hate and or bias-motivated occurrences. In situations where violence occurs, it's important that we recognize when a student responds or behaves in a way that falls under either criteria, they're responding or reacting to something happening within themselves or in the environment. We need to respond in a manner that makes them safe and secure, and secures the safety of those around them. While we might be talking about behavior that is characterized as violent, we need to be clear that we don't characterize kids this way. Collecting and analyzing data provides the tools for schools and system leaders to evaluate the precise work required, so staff can then commit and engage in the practices that create and sustain the conditions that enable students to be successful. The data collected through the school climate and well-being surveys, which are administered every 2 years, are used by schools to support the creation, sustainment, and promotion of safe, equitable, and inclusive learning environments for students and staff. While we only move our work ahead by recognizing the areas of need and committing to the system work necessary to address these areas of need, it is also important to recognize where we are doing well as a district. The following findings suggest areas of strength. The majority of our students were able to report that they experience a positive school climate. Their responses indicate a strong sense of belonging and connection to their schools, surrounded by supportive relationships and engagement in meaningful learning. They experienced feelings of safety and indicated that they were not being bullied. Let me say that again. They experienced feelings of safety and indicated that they were not being bullied. When there were reports of experience with bullying, students were reporting their experiences directly to the caring adults in the building. This can be seen as a reflective of the positive impact of established caring relationships. This is significant as it is a key feature of schools acting as a protective factor. The feedback from this survey affirms our commitment to continue our ongoing work to support positive school climates for all students and staff. With regards to violent incident reporting data, a summary of the total number of reports that staff have submitted through the Employee Violent Incident Reporting Form over the past 4 years can be found in the Employee Violent Incident Reporting Data section of Appendix B. The largest percentage of the incidents tend to be reported in the elementary panel, specifically in the early years and primary grades. These behaviors can be mitigated and supported safely by reinforcing the addressing the relationship between a student and their environment. This is an ongoing process that includes strategic information and data gathering, specific practice actions, strategies, and ongoing planning.
Thank you. When there has been an incident, which under the Ontario Health and Safety Act would be considered a violent incident, there are a number of steps that occur. First and foremost, administrators will check in with staff, students to ensure everyone is safe and to ensure if any immediate follow-up support is needed. The partnership with the caregiver and family is critical in understanding how the student is experiencing school and what program adjustments may be needed. For instances where there may be impact to other students, classroom conversations may occur in follow-up. School teams can draw on the Family of Schools, Positive School Climates team, and Inclusive Student Services team members for support. For each violent incident, a debrief must occur. Debriefs may look different depending on the incident. Debriefs are important to review an incident in relation, quite often, to a student's behavior safety plan. Was the safety plan followed? Does the safety plan require adjustment? And what can we do differently to support the student and staff to be safe? As you will find, starting on page 8 of the report, we have many structures that provide opportunities for discussion and problem solving. Within each structure, members of the committees review the data, discuss trends, and work collaboratively to find solutions.
For students, additional support may involve additional assessment and clinical support. Where there is potential threat to self or others, the Violent Threat Risk Assessment Protocol may be enacted to ensure a timely response. The process brings family voice alongside a community and district planning team focused on leveraging supports. Based on consent from student or family, consultation with community partners may also be necessary to problem solve and create programming that best supports the student to be successful. We have other processes to support staff. Through the debrief and work with Inclusive Student Services and community partners, additional training may be provided. There are also a number of committees that provide opportunities for union federations to bring forward concerns for system problem solving and discussion. Of course, we always encourage specific issues to be brought forward to appropriate departments through open dialogue so that these concerns can be addressed in a timely manner. Addressing the challenges of complex incidents involves the collective efforts of all educational partners. We are committed to engage in collaborative discussion to problem solve. We know that each incident is unique. We need to consider the student, the staff, the site, as we develop strategies and resources. We do know that through these collaborative discussions, we can improve the daily experience for students and staff in our schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions from trustees? And I'm going to go to Trustee Cunningham.
Thank you very much for that report. I have many questions, so I'm sure some of those will be answered after today's meeting. One of the things that you just said is, when a student responds or behaves violently, they're responding or reacting to something happening within themselves or their environment. We need to respond in a manner that makes them safe and secures the safety of those around them. I think absolutely, and I want to emphasize this, that I do think the best way to address violence is to focus on the needs of the person who is committing it so that we can prevent this moving forward. That being said, something that I do get a lot of emails from parents from, and I hear a lot about, is when their child is repeatedly attacked, whether it is physically, whether it is verbally, by the same student over and over and over again. I understand that progressive discipline is very important. I understand the best way to solve these issues long term is by focusing on changing that relationship between the students and their environment. However, it is leaving the victims of these violent incidents traumatized and still in a situation where they're having to deal with the same incident over and over and over again. And I'm wondering what we can do to help these students while we're helping the other ones as well.
Not yet. Great point. I agree with the things that you're saying. These are things that I think that we've been trying to figure out for a long period of time. And I know that in the space, there are kids that are being harmed. All of us on this team recognize that we have a role to play in this, and that we're making sure that our principals and our other workers in the schools are understanding their roles as well too. We do know for sure that kids are coming to school, and so we have to put some onus on ourselves to be able to make a better environment for them.
Thank you. Not 100% sure that answered my question, but I did want to so maybe we can come back to that when we address things in a future public meeting. But I did want to ask also, it mentions in your report in section 3.5.1 that students are not identified in the violence reports. And I'm wondering about the logic for that. So if there is a student that is repeatedly engaging in violent behaviors and we're trying to track them, figure out what these triggers are, If they switch schools, it seems like all that data and all that learning becomes lost. So I'm wondering what the logic is in not including students' identities when we have those violence reports.
I think that I'd like to go back to the first question. I'm just going to call on Superintendent Macaulay, if you wouldn't mind.
Through you, Chair.
Go ahead, Director.
If I may, just going back to the initial question around the students in schools who do have dysregulated behavior or who do commit acts that qualify as violence. When we think about what's happening in the classroom in the moment, there are steps that are undertaken to ensure that whether it is that those students are isolated in a manner that they need, whether it is that there is a pause in attendance with the collaboration with the parent. There are times when there are supports that are put in place with the staff that are involved. To Superintendent Mundy's point, it's certainly dependent on the circumstances in the school. So whether it's the classroom, whether it's the age, you will see in the data sets that are at the end, we have a large number of students who are in our incidents that happen in JK to grade 3, much smaller number of students that are incidents that happen in the secondary schools. So that will also determine the nature of the intervention that takes place. So we do recognize that there are impacts. Sometimes there is an evacuation of classes. Sometimes there's an evacuation of a classroom. Sometimes it's an engagement with the parent. So it's very difficult to say that there's one thing that is always done. And there are times when what happens is that you see an intervention takes place. You see that there is a reduction in violent outbursts, and then you will see a trigger over a period of time that it comes back again a number of times, and it has to be revisited in order to recalibrate. So I could give you a varied number of things that are undertaken. The one thing I can say is that the expectation is that something is done, nothing is not acceptable.
I want to go back to Trustee Cunningham.
That doesn't quite answer my question either, so I just want to rephrase it because I think maybe I wasn't being clear. I know 100% that you Teachers Collective, we are doing everything that we can to manage in the moment, and that we are doing everything that we can to manage ongoing. My question is specifically about the students who are being attacked and what we are doing to help them feel safe when they are traumatized by being in the presence of the person who attacks them day after day after day.
Director?
Yes, so to answer that question and specific to those students, we would expect that at the school level there would be intervention that is either restorative or creating a physical change to ensure the safety of those students. So if there is in fact an engagement of one student with another student that causes harm in that way, we would expect that there are undertakings where a strategy is put in place, whether it is that students are placed in different places, whether it is a different kind of intervention with the staff that is supervising or supporting. But again, it would be very dependent on that circumstance, but there are a variety of different moves that can be undertaken, and they have to be undertaken in partnership with the parents of the children who are experiencing or victims of this engagement, as well as those students who need the support to be able to calibrate their behaviors. So there is a recognition of the students who are impacted, particularly when that is brought to the attention. Sometimes what happens is that the impact of the trauma of what is happening in the classroom is not shared at the school level, it is shared at home. And so through that, we expect that we would need that collaboration with the school staff in order to be able to do something about that.
I'm going to move on. I'll come back to you, Trustee Cunningham. I'll move on now. The chair recognizes Trustee Morton. I'll come back to that question.
Thank you, and through you. Firstly, I want to say thank you for this very comprehensive report. I realize that our staff, including our mental health lead, our chief psychologist, our lead social worker, are all engaged with community groups, working collaboratively in the pursuit of the best programming to support the mental well-being of our students and our staff. Mental health must continue to be our focus. It is so important. Prior to COVID, we talked about 20% of our population was suffering from mental breakdown, one form or another. It's much greater than that now. We need to spend much more time focusing on mental well-being. I do have a concern with the report, and you've pointed it out. On page 23, it says there were limited survey responses from parents, guardians, and secondary students. How can we need to hear the voices of our parents, of our students. Thank you. How can we improve and gain more feedback? Any ideas would be great.
Superintendent Crossdale.
We're going to talk a little bit about the school climate. We have some people at the back that come and could present something.
Pardon? I think that's Georgette's mic.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, just to address that, Trustee Morton, this is an area we have to do better at, plain and simple. We learned a lot from this past administration of the school climate survey, and one of the things that we recognize is that we're not as clearly as we think we were communicating. We got to do better with that. So we have already talked, we've already got our committee afterwards to look at how we did communications. We are looking at much more of a central format with communications ahead of time, so that we're ensuring we're as transparent as possible and that we're as clear as possible ahead of time. It is our goal to get greater participation. We acknowledge that while it is voluntary, we do want to hear the voices of our parents for sure. So we have already had that conversation, and it is something that we'll be taking some action on and make sure that it's better next time around. Thank you.
The chair recognizes student trustee Ben Cameron.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to also thank staff for this report, this very long report. And I think it emphasizes really that our schools are safe places to be. And I also want to acknowledge that the motion passed by the board in October said that the report should come by March 31st, and it's May 1st, and I'm aware of the circumstances around that, and I would just like to say that I wish for this not to become a precedent. My first question is around the bullying prevention and intervention plan, and as well as the equitable framework for progressive discipline. I'm wondering where we might be able to find those documents for an outline of what they look like, things like that.
Right, through you, through you, Madam Chair, thank you for your question. Our bullying prevention intervention plan, every school is expected to post that on their school website. It is something that is regularly reviewed and is revised accordingly. How they revise that really is based upon the feedback that they do get from the school climate survey. And when we talk about the bullying intervention plan, we're not just talking about ensuring that our students know how to report bullying when it does take place, but we're also talking about those important pieces in setting the everyday conditions so that, of course, if we have a better environment at school, the instances of bullying will be reduced. So that's where you can find that. Progressive discipline, bias aware progressive discipline. I will have to get back to as the location. I know administrators have that, but I can certainly get back to you in terms of where you can find that.
Thank you. I'm going to call on student trustee Gwen Hewitt.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
And through you, Chair, I'm looking back at section 4.1.1, which addresses the 2022 to 25 mental health and well-being action plan. First of all, I think it's a very good plan, but I'm wondering who makes this plan. I understand it's probably mental health lead Stephanie Pelvor, but I'm wondering if there's like a committee that is maybe similar to the strategic planning committee that kind of facilitates this plan. From my understanding, it might be a staff-only committee, but I think that trustee input could help. So I'm wondering if trustee input, specifically student trustee input, is something that's welcome in terms of making the mental health and well-being action plan in the future. Thank you.
Superintendent Macaulay.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Thank you for the comments about the plan. The plan itself can be found on Appendix A. This is our second mental health and well-being action plan as a district. The first plan was initiated with a sole focus on students, and coming into the second plan, we felt it was really important not only to center identity-affirming practices for students, but to also identify the importance of staff well-being and mental health as well. So you see that centered. Feedback on the former plan was in terms of its thickness, in terms of people being able to engage with the plan, understand its core practices and values, and being able to share that. So an interdepartment team informed by different committees such as the Special Education Advisory Committee and the tables that were referenced by Trustee Morton that our special education and mental health staff sit on within the community, because again, this plan sits up against and adjacent to many of our partners' plans in providing a mental health strategy for Durham Region. Co-developed the plan and got it to the point where it is single page with the 3 goals of learn, support, and connect, which mirror the strategies of Tier 1 being the conditions for all, the sum in terms of those that need a little bit more, and then the connect for those that need intensive support. Because the plan was developed, as you see, in 2022, coming into the 2022 school year, so the plan was actually developed in 21-22 at the height of the pandemic. So at that point, it was a staff-only committee informed by the work that our regulated health professionals do directly with students, student groups accessing alternate learning sites such as DAS, who are at a higher frequency of use of mental health services, the connection that, as you said, our mental health leader has with Student Senate, and the work that you do to lead well-being and mental health work for students, and then those community connections. As we've moved through this year, looking at implementation with a focus on that mental health literacy and the Tier 1, your feedback in terms of increasing student voice, increasing parent voice, and stakeholder voice is really important. And so you'll see some work coming out for the 23-24 school year that amplifies that.
Thank you. I'm going to call on Trustee Linton. Go ahead, Stephen.
Thank you, and again, thank you for the report. You've already touched on one point which was brought up by Trustee Morton around the participation, but again, the numbers are alarming. 65% of elementary students participated, which is down 30%, 28% of secondary students, which is down 8%, 3% of elementary parents, which is down 6%, and 3% of secondary parents, which is down 2%. So I'm looking at this and then reading the next paragraph, which says the survey is anonymous and voluntary. The point that got me is with administration survey, the effectiveness of communication design and process is reviewed with the purpose of identifying and removing obstacles. This was a 45-page survey. Grade 4 to 6, students in grade 4 to 6 had to go through 44 pages, of which the first question around any kind of violence wasn't until page 8 or 9. And then the same for grade 7 and 12 students, 45-page survey, and again, the first question around actual bullying or violence wasn't until page 9, I believe. So I guess my question is just what was the consultation process in terms of identifying the best method of asking these questions in a way where students could give accurate responses?
Superintendent Macaulay.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Thank you for your comments. I think one of the reflections that we have as a team across a number of surveys is just to your point in terms of simplifying for intention of use of the data coming out of the survey and simplifying the data itself, the survey itself, in order to obtain that voice, and then having opportunities for follow-up conversations. So I know our Positive School Climate team, working with our assessment department as well as the teams involved, are committed to reviewing the survey. When the survey first launched, there were requirements from the ministry that set the type of questions to be asked, as you see that in the categories. So there are some frameworks that we must work within, but absolutely value your comment in terms of making the survey accessible in order to contribute to increased response rates.
Thank you. I'll go to Trustee Piniello. Go ahead, Shailene.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, first I want to also echo gratitude for this report. It is very comprehensive. There's a lot to go through here. And I'll premise by saying that my comments are directed more largely at these systems and not necessarily at staff, because I do know that people are doing the best with what they have, but this is frustrating to see for a number of reasons. So I'm looking at page 67, 68 for anyone who wants to take a peek and follow along. But mostly I'm noticing the patterns. So yes, we've talked about low turnout for the survey, and I think that's very telling. But we're also seeing patterns of, EAs being disproportionately impacted. It being disproportionately those JK to grade 3 age group. So kids who were either starting their journey during COVID or had just started before lockdowns. And then I flip the page over and I see disproportionate expulsion rates still for Black and some racialized students. And then I look back at the survey and I see who was reporting feelings of not belonging, the greatest disagreement, and that was Indigenous, Two-Spirit, 2S LGBTQIA plus youth. And so when I'm looking at all of this data and I'm listening to the conversation around the table, I can't help but think that we're looking at pages upon pages upon pages of numbers, which in and of itself, it's comprehensive. Is it the most accessible? No, not at all. But when we take a look at this, I remind my fellow trustees that we are missing so many stories. We don't know how many of these reports are from the same students who are still struggling, and this is painting an ongoing picture of struggle. I don't know if this disaggregates that and specifies. If so, I haven't found it. But why this is concerning to me is because if we know that there's a significant need, especially in our lower grades, when kids are just starting, and we aren't even launching children off from a good place, then we're failing, and it doesn't bode well for us. And so how do we, as an institution within a system that is supposed to be world-renowned, how do we push for change and improvement? And so my question to no one in particular, just for us all to think on, is how are we as boards of trustees, as parents in the audiences, as staff who show up to work every day to do this work, and to people who are viewing at home, and the students who came here tonight to tell us that it took a program specifically for them to bridge a gap and a need for them to see improvement and to have a positive outcome and experience in their school journey. How do we grow from here? Because I don't see this getting better if we are still struggling over funding. We're underprepared, we're understaffed, we're under-resourced for the growth that Durham is seeing. Oshawa alone is growing rapidly, and I know my colleagues from other municipalities would say the same. So if we aren't being proactive, then we're just constantly being reactive. And if this number of primary students who either have IEPs or BSPs are being underserved and EAs are feeling the brunt of that, and we can't hire more EAs because we don't have the funding, then what are we essentially saying to all those students and families as they progress out of those grades? We're saying that your entire school experience is going to launch from this point where you are clearly in need of our help, and there's nothing that we can do to help you. Not for lack of trying, but rather because of political will and the fact that there is a lack of initiative. And we as trustees have a very difficult job, as do the staff of this board who have to make something out of nothing. So I am heartbroken for the families, much like mine, who had a student with severe needs that were not met for much of his career. And I'm heartbroken for those who are going to have the same experience that my family did. And you have all these wonderful people at this table who want to do it differently. And so I challenge you all, what are we going to do? Because this can't be the same report that we get next year and the year after and 10 years from now, but it's going to be at this rate. And so that's my challenge. And thank you again for pulling this together for us.
Thank you, Trustee Pinello. That's certainly a lot to think about. I'm going to go back now to Trustee Cunningham for her second question. And I believe Superintendent Macaulay will be responding to that.
I'll just ask the question again, but something that Trustee Pinello mentioned that taps into this is that when we look at the people who are impacted, we don't know if it's one student impacting many, and thus the numbers are a little bit skewed. And that's why, one of the reasons why I was asking why students are not identified in violence reports, because if we don't see these patterns, if we don't track them, if kids move between schools, how do we keep consistent in how we identify and help these problems if we're not tracking them?
Superintendent Macaulay.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I think if we can take it in two parts. So one is what happens when there is an incident at a school in terms of the information, and as you shared in your question, how do we link that, both for the support of the student, who programming needs to be refined for in order to meet their needs, the students around them in their classrooms and on the yard, and then the staff that are supporting them, as your colleague mentioned, in terms of the staff that quite often work most directly and in physical proximity to our kids. So in terms of the reporting, a number of things occur. So the data referred to is the violent incident reports, and because that's under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, that is the experience of the worker under that legislation. So the worker is reporting what they have experienced under one of those definitions, which can include an incident or a threat of an incident, and report that. Because that centers on the experience of the worker, that is the form that comes in under there. Our school administrators then map a number of other processes in terms of supporting the students. And when we talk to school administrators, either as family of school superintendents, myself in terms of inclusive student services, our district principals, our school principals and vice principals, and our special education resource teachers and teachers know the stories and are getting those pieces to tie together. So although the violent incident refers to the experience of the staff, there are other documents and forms that link it in the background in terms of the student. So things like if a student has a behavior safety plan, the debrief that follows an incident, the plan must be updated and shared with staff. It's updated collaboratively, sometimes, again, not wanting to make violent incidents synonymous with students with special education needs. That's really important to me, that it's not synonymous in terms of that. But where we have plans, that plan is then updated, shared back out with family, quite often redesigned with student, with family in a moment of calm. And quite often we're bringing together what we refer to as a care conference. So common language in education or other sectors may refer to a case conference. Our kids are not cases. They're fully formed human beings with all of their gifts and assets and talents and where they struggle. And so we'll quite often bring a number of individuals, including parent caregiver, if there's community partners involved, and bring people around a table to say, what do we need to do differently for the safety of the student, the students, and the staff that support them. So we see that kind of violent incident form. There may be a behavior safety plan that either, or if there isn't one, there's consideration. In that moment, there's all kinds of considerations such as adjustment to equipment for the student, for staff. And then to your comment around the peers, quite often it is the caring adult that has the closest relationship with the classroom of learners that's best able to have those conversations as a community of learner, but we want to make sure they're supported too. So that's where staff such as social workers or psychologists that support the school can either help guide the conversation guide ahead of time or can be in the space to come alongside those conversations as well. And then where there is repeated risk, we also have the ability to put safety plans in place that protect the other students as well. So it's that script for if A happens, B is, and C and D are the actions that we will take, both in terms of the student who is at the heart of that, as well as the staff and peers. So kind of looking at that triangulation. But our school administrators very much know how that information fits back together in how students and staff are experiencing the day at school. So I just want to make sure, because I appreciate the question, because when you look at the violent incident data and the form itself, it does look like it's staff exclusive of student. It's just that those two processes sit different. There's a lot of reasons why. Part of that is also protection of confidential information. So a behavior plan may include diagnoses information or what falls under protected health information. So what we don't do is have an occupational health and safety form cross over with personal health information of a student, but in the planning, those things come together. And then I apologize for the length of the answer, but I don't want to miss your question about what happens if a student switches schools. So under various forms of legislation, we have an ability for sending and receiving schools to connect in transition. We don't want that to just be exclusively staff, so quite often our students will inform us what they need in terms of that transition support. Families will often inform, again, having those conversations at home about what a student is nervous about, what works really, really well for them, and what has been tried that we don't want the new school to try because we know it doesn't work. So sometimes the information is what works, and sometimes the information alongside is, please don't do these things. We know they're not helpful. And then many of our students also, when we get into those that have complex needs, have a lot of community partners as well. And so quite often that planning is done really thoroughly with all of those partners at the table. But most often when a transition is known, because sometimes families don't know that a transition's coming up, and then we do our best to do that. The student voice is really important. And where a student has fairly complex strengths and needs in programming, transition between schools does not necessarily mean ending school at dismissal on one day and entering into the next school at the beginning of the day the next day. That sometimes we need to do physical alterations to a building, get equipment in, both either for the student for accessibility or for staff. And so sometimes that process gets slowed down a little bit because we'd rather take a slightly slower, longer run at a really effective and positive experience for all involved than a rushed response that fails to meet need. So lots of layers that go into that and very individualized to each student.
I just wanted to say thank you for that really thorough answer.
Trustees, we do have quite a bit to cover yet on our agenda, and we have an important item in our memos around the learning resource selection policy and process that we'd like to have some discussion around. So I'm going to ask trustees who have any additional questions that I believe If you would like to submit those to Kathy Fitzpatrick, she will make sure that they get to the appropriate individual, and then we can assure you that the responses to those questions will be presented in the public forum. So I'd like to move on now to item 6 on your agenda for the director's update, and I'm going to call on Director Camille Williams-Taylor.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Each year, the first week of May is recognized as Children's Mental Health Week. This is a time to focus on increasing awareness of child and youth mental health, decreasing stigma, and spreading the word that help is available. Durham District School Board schools are participating in a variety of initiatives this week to recognize the importance of children's mental health. On a related note, earlier today the province announced that the grade 10 career studies curriculum will be updated for fall of 2024 in an effort to strengthen mental health and learning supports in classrooms, as well as the introduction of mandatory resources for teachers and students on mental health literacy in grades 7 and 8. The first week of May is also Education Week, and Durham District School Board will be celebrating student achievement and educator excellence alongside school boards across the province. We're recognizing 3 heritage months in May. Asian and South Asian Heritage Month. Over the past 2 centuries, immigrants have come to Canada from East, Southern, West, and Southeast Asia, bringing to Canada a rich cultural heritage representing many languages, ethnicities, and religious traditions. Dutch Heritage Month. Canada is home to over 1 million people of Dutch descent, and we are grateful for the contribution of Dutch Canadians to the economic, political, social, and cultural fabric of our society. Pardon me. Jewish Heritage Month. An opportunity to remember, celebrate, and educate future generations about the history and inspirational role of Jewish Canadians. Canada is home to the 4th largest Jewish population in the world. On April 19th, the Leadership Department hosted a networking fair at the Education Center that provided opportunities for new and experienced school and centrally assigned leaders to build connections and collaborate. The event was well attended and provided opportunities to build trust amongst colleagues and work towards achieving common goals in support of the Durham District School Board students. I'm happy to confirm the in-person return of the Durham Partners Symposium coming up later this month on Saturday, May 27th. The symposium theme for this year is Fostering Resilience in Children, Supporting Mental Health and Social Well-Being. The full-day event will feature 4 keynote speakers, as well as a variety of breakout sessions that families can attend based on their unique interests and needs. For more information and to register, please visit the DDSB website. May is proving to be a month of celebration as we have 2 school communities recognizing significant milestones. On May 6th, Port Perry High School will celebrate its 150th anniversary, and on the weekend of May 26th to 28th, Uxbridge Secondary School celebrates its 100th anniversary. More information about these events will be available on our website. And finally, about our students and student achievement and perfect fit with Education Week. DDSB students are competing at the Provincial Skills Competition at the Toronto Congress Centre. The Skills Ontario competition offers a unique opportunity for students to demonstrate that they are the best of the best in their field. Over the 2.5 full days, they demonstrate their skills in various areas, and the competition concludes with an award ceremony on May the 3rd. We have to date today the elementary schools, 8 DDSB teams from elementary schools competed, and we came away with 1 gold, 1 silver, and 3 bronze. Tomorrow, the secondary students will be participating, and we wish all students congratulations on good outcomes and all the best for outcomes to come.
Thank you, Director. We're going to move on to item 7. It's our 1 recommended action item. And before I call on trustees for that presentation, I just ask if the motion can be put up on the screen for us. Thank you, Jillian. I'd like to call on trustees Oldfield and Pinillo for our the motion regarding establishing an ad hoc committee. Go ahead, trustee Oldfield.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. On page 77 is the background, and I am going to go through that just so it's clear for everybody. On March 16th, 2023, Trustee Pinello and I were invited to meet with MPP Jennifer French, the MPP for Oshawa. At that meeting, the issue of staffing shortages in Ontario, and specifically at the DDSB, were raised by MPP French and included concerns about the challenge of recruiting and retaining qualified educational assistants and certified teachers. Discussion turned to the possibility of creating pathways for those unqualified and/or uncertified staff to obtain qualifications or certification. And MPP French raised the concern that union leadership might be opposed to processes that would continue to allow unqualified and uncertified staff in the classrooms. Following the meeting with MPP French, Trustee Pinello and I met with a number of union leaders representing employees at the DDSB to ascertain their views on creating pathways to obtaining required qualifications certification. As a result of the meeting with the union leaders, it became clear to Trustee Pinello and I that difficulties with recruitment and retention of qualified and/or certified staff are not solely a result of a lack of qualified or certified workers, but rather a result of a number of interrelated issues such as violence and harassment, mental health and well-being, and existing staff shortages and absences, to name a few. There are, in fact, qualified educational assistants and certified teachers that are choosing not to work either in their field at all or at the DDSB. A number of the issues raised by the union leaders echoed those that have been raised by trustees over the past several months, including concerns about the mental health of staff and students and the rise in violent incidents experienced by both staff and students. A number of questions, Trustee Pinello and I felt that in order to be able to accurately assess the effectiveness of current policies and procedures, to develop new policies and procedures and proactively find solutions, trustees must first be able to fully understand the complex issues related to violent incidents in the workplace, classrooms, and school communities as experienced by staff, students, and their families. This resulted in the motion moved by Trustee Pinello at the Standing Committee meeting of April 3rd, 2023, which was deferred by the Board of Trustees to the Standing Committee of May 1st, so this evening. There were some questions that were raised by trustees at the April 3rd, 2023 Standing Committee meeting, specifically around the reporting process and whether there should be an end date for an ad hoc committee. Those are addressed in the bylaws. They're included at page 77 or, excuse me, 78 for ease of reference. That is the background for the motion, and Chair, I move that the Board of Trustees strike an ad hoc committee comprised of all trustees with input from student trustees, school administrators, union representatives, senior staff, with the purpose of information gathering, monitoring, and evaluating issues related but not limited to incidents of violence and harassment, including any and all interrelated issues that may arise or be presented to the committee. The committee shall collaboratively build policy, strategies, and standards for safety and sustainability and measure the implementation of the collaborative plans.
We have a motion as read by Trustee Oldfield, looking for a seconder. Trustee Pinello. Are there any questions or comments? Student Trustee Ben Cameron.
Thank you, Chair. As many trustees know, I'm a strong advocate for the rights of student trustees at the board table, and I would just like to clarify some language in the motion to no fault of the authors. To make sure that it's clear that student trustees are going to be a part of the committee. So I would like to suggest an amendment to the motion, and it will read as follows. So I'm just going to read from the start of the motion, and So be amended to read that the Board of Trustees strike an ad hoc committee comprised of all trustees and student trustees with input from school administrators until the end of the motion.
I'd like to just speak with, call on Council Cotter to just verify if all of the input at this ad hoc committee would be available then to student trustees based on our policies.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Student trustees under our bylaws and the Education Act are entitled to participate in all committee meetings. So I think the suggested language is consistent with that. So I'm not sure whether they're members of the committee, but they certainly have a right to attend and participate in accordance with the statutory grant of that right in the Education Act.
So we have an amendment to the main motion, and I'm just going to ask, so that would be comprised of trustees and student trustees. Is that correct, Trustee Cameron? And everything else, this is a small amendment here. Could I have a seconder for the amendment? I'm looking for someone to put the motion forward, actually. Thank you, Director. Will you put the motion forward for the amendment? Jill? Okay, and looking for a seconder for that, Trustee Cunningham. So is there any discussion then around this? It seems that Council Cotter has indicated that the wording would be inappropriate as far as our bylaws are concerned. I believe Trustee Edwards was first up there.
Thank you. And I truly value student input on all our committees for sure, because I mean, they are the people, the voice, and they see what's going on in the school, they hear what's going on. My concern about making the change at this point in time is I still have concerns around the committee, and depending on what is discussed there when we're talking and how it's discussed, there might be individual cases that may discuss, et cetera, that they would not be able to be privy to that information. So at this point in time, I cannot support that amendment. Again, it depends on what the final motion is, but at this point in time, I couldn't support it, only because I don't know what's going to be discussed at this particular time and what the full purpose of this committee is. So, thank you.
I want to go back to Council Cotter because I think it's my understanding that that was covered in your response, your prior response. Did I understand that correctly?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Well, I mean, it is, you know, as I say, they are not members of the committee, but they have a statutory right to attend all committee meetings except those that are in closed session and that deal with intimate personal financial data such as is set out in Section 207 2B of the Education Act. So, you know, the wording, you know, is awkward the way it is. You know, they have a right to attend and participate, but I think, you know, the fact is they're not members and therefore can be excluded for certain topics that are confidential under that subsection. So. It's not for me to suggest revised language, but it could be cleaner in terms of that nuance.
So I'm going to go to Trustee Oldfield. Go ahead, Deb.
Thank you. I support the amendment, and I don't see having student trustees on the committee as being an issue. I think student trustees attend in-camera sessions, and we often have to make a determination about when or when it's appropriate for them to be in attendance. I don't see this committee being any different or discussing issues that are any more confidential than those that might come up at our in-camera sessions.
Thank you. I'm going to go actually to Trustee Cunningham. Go ahead, Emma.
A question around that then. Would this committee not be public committee? Would this only be a closed session committee, or is this something that would be open to the public? Because if this is open to the public, aside from closed session when necessary, then I don't see a reason why student trustees couldn't sit there.
It is an ad hoc committee, Trustee Cunningham, and but any policy or recommendations coming out of it would have to go forward to board.
But is it public?
No,
okay,
it is an
thank
ad hoc committee.
If I might be able to jump in, under our bylaws.
Thank you, Councillor Cotter.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Thatcher. Under our bylaws and the Education Act, all board committees must hold their meetings in public unless the criteria of Section 207 for in-camera closed session is satisfied. So there are certain topics that could go in session, but that's sort of an agenda by agenda determination that's made by the chair of the committee in consultation with the director.
Thank you for the clarification, Director.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I think the line in the motion that may be causing some reservation is the line where it says, evaluating issues related but not limited to incidents of violence and harassment, including any and all interrelated issues that may arise or be presented to the committee. So if there were, for example, a conversation about specific incidents of harassment or violence that occurred in a school, this would be then, if it were to be in a public space, it does run the risk of creating a breach of privacy in multiple and sundry ways, including having student trustees as a part of it. So if I may, that may be the line that is causing contention, because such a discussion, if it's incidents of violence and harassment, should not take place in a public sphere, because it puts a number of people at risk.
Thank you, Director. I'm going to call on Trustee Morton. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Thank you, and through you. I have a question regarding the wording of all trustees and student trustees, because in our history, we've had many ad hoc committees, but we have not said that all trustees would be members. It has been freedom of choice. Are we making a difference here in saying that all trustees will be members, all student trustees will be members, and are we able to do that? Question.
Good point. Trustee Oldfield?
Yeah, I can answer that, although I don't know if it's relevant to the amendment, but I will answer that. I think it's all trustees who are wanting to participate, just like any other committee where we all can attend. Some of us do and some of us don't. Sometimes we're able to, sometimes we're not. The other thing I understand from an ad hoc committee is that the committee itself will develop its terms of reference. And so at that point, more things would become clear, but that's not something that should happen prior to the committee being formed, because in fact, the committee itself should be setting its terms of reference. So it's not mandatory attendance, because I don't think that's actually a thing that I've witnessed yet to date, but that it's open to all trustees to be able to attend should they choose.
At this point, then, I'm going to go back to the amendment, and if there's no further discussion on the amendment, I'll call the question. Seeing none. So the amendment reads that the Board of Trustees strike an ad hoc committee comprised of all trustees and student trustees. I believe we had Jill put that forward, and it was seconded by Trustee Cunningham. Now I'm going to ask you to use your check mark or your red X. If you are in favor of the amendment, then you'll raise your green check mark. If you're opposed, the red X. So I see 3 opposed. And okay. Okay, I'll just have to count here for, so I see 2, so 3 opposed and 8 in favor. Motion carries. Okay, so is there any further discussion then about the motion? We have a motion on the floor, an amended motion. I'm going to go to Trustee Miller. You haven't spoken yet, Co-Trustee Miller.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Thatcher. I'm just questioning, am I able to ask a question about the actual committee itself in terms of, I wanted to ask a question in comparison to an advisory committee and versus this ad hoc committee, and just kind of clarify the differences in terms of what that would look like. Is that possible?
I believe that would be appropriate. Go ahead.
Okay, so my question is to, I guess, whoever can answer.
It's through the chair,
Yeah,
trustee.
okay. Thank you. So my question is, basically, I want to understand, based on the Trustee Panillo and Trustee Ophil's reasoning for the ad hoc committee, I just want to understand, since it says here that in order to accurately assess effectiveness of current policies and procedures, develop any new policies and procedures, and proactively find solutions, I would like to know how does that operate differently from an advisory committee under this context? Thank you.
I'm going to call on Council Cotter, if you don't mind.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Thatcher. So the term, there's some definitions, I guess, that we need to make sure we're all singing from the same song sheet. So the word advisory committee has a couple of different meanings. There are statutory committees that are enshrined in the Education Act and the regulations under the Education Act that do serve an advisory function. So, for example, the SEAC committee deals with special education issues. That is a statutory committee that does serve an advisory function. So they do, under the Education Act and the regulations, they do come to board with recommendations on policy changes. So there are statutory committees that do serve an advisory function. There are also what we have under our bylaws called advisory committees, which is a committee that stands sort of autonomous from the board, although the board establishes the committee. So we have, for example, the Indigenous Advisory Circle, which is an advisory committee that's enshrined in our bylaws, but is not a committee of the board. So to be a committee of the board, in other words, to be an ad hoc committee under our bylaws, for this board to establish a committee, it can only be trustees under the Education Act. If you want to have a committee that's with community members and that sort of thing, then you would establish an advisory committee. So that's really the key, I think, distinction there. So to be an ad hoc committee of the board is to have a committee made up of only trustees. And then you would work through the Director of Education to have staff assigned to that committee to provide the necessary support. And an ad hoc committee, the terms of reference could be to study a policy issue and come back and advise the board on that. So an ad hoc committee can have a number of purposes, can have a purpose to study a particular issue, to gather certain information, and report back to the board. But ad hoc committees always report back to the board. Under our bylaws, I think they actually report back to standing committee, and then the standing committee would then report to the board on any policy initiatives or the work of the committee. So I hope that answers the question.
Move on to Trustee Cunningham. Go ahead, Emma.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, I wanted to go back to the line that Director Williams-Taylor flagged earlier about incidents of violence and harassment. I'm wondering how we would get that. To my knowledge, that we are not privy to that sort of information under anything less than a need-to-know basis. So we could certainly get anonymized data, and I feel that we got some of that in the Positive School Climates meeting today, but I don't see how we would be able to get those individual stories. I don't know where that would come from. So that line is standing out for me as well.
Trustee Panillo, would you address that?
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Before I make my comment, I'll answer the question as best as I can. I think that I'll echo what Trustee Oldfield said earlier about, the exact scope of this being left to the committee, because I think once you have people at the table who have a different vision than what we might even right now, that it's going to shift and change. But I think in the context of this, we are all held to very specific legislation and standards about what we can and cannot be privy to. I know we all receive emails with far more detail sometimes than we're supposed to have access to. And typically that is coming from, parents, families, students who are at the end of the line and they don't know where else to go. And so I think in these cases we have responsibilities to protect their privacy and confidentiality, but the importance that, and the weight, I will say, that their stories carry with us are things that we bring back to this board table and that we use to then suggest things with. So I'm not suggesting that, this committee is going to pull out individual case files and go through actual incidences, but I think when we speak broadly about what we're seeing in schools, and we speak about patterns and things that are working and things that aren't working, we can do that in a way that's respectful of people's privacy, and also doesn't breach any of the confidentiality and privacy clauses that we have to adhere to. On that note, if I can segue into my original comment that I was going to make.
Go ahead, Trustee.
Thank you, Chair. I do want to thank all the trustees for their comments and questions ever since the April, I think, the 3rd meeting. Understandably, it was a lot, and it was very different than what you were expecting, and that was because we were originally just going to do a notice of motion, but sometimes things don't go as you plan. But I think if I could simplify maybe the purpose of this or the vision that at least I had from our conversations with Trustee Oldfield, it's that for a long time, governance in any institution has been done on a not necessarily need to know basis, but on a report basis, a very one arm removed. And what that's created, especially during COVID, I think is a disconnect and a disengagement of communities who need to be involved and who want to be involved and who we haven't been engaging with. So this is one small step forward to re-engaging and being on the ground. I call it a pulse check, but it's a way for us to know if the bylaws and the research and the reports that we're reading are actually having an impact on the ground. Because often, again, we don't find out until someone calls us in a panic or emails us with chapters upon chapters of a journey that is just mind-blowing, and you don't know what to do with it. And so I think for us as trustees, it's important, it's an accountability measure, but it's also a good faith measure where we are going to a table with the intention to listen. We're trying to learn something from people who have an experience in the schools that we don't. We have leadership staff who have certain responsibilities and frameworks that they have to work within, so we are always going to get reports through that lens and through what they have to do and what they have to produce, and that's just the reality of it. So when you get those stories of those EAs, or you get the stories of the supply teachers, you gain something from that that we wouldn't otherwise, unless we happen to know somebody in the field. And so that's a privilege that I'm not going to assume all of us have. And so I think this is an opportunity to Trustee Morton's earlier question for trustees to choose if they want to come and listen and choose if they don't, but it will be open to everyone with the intention of building relationships that we didn't previously have and that we have the opportunity to have now. And so I think this is a good way for us to see what's working, but also to have others give us perspectives that we just don't have. And so, yeah, in closing, I would say overall, we have a duty to do things differently. Education as a whole right now needs us to do things differently. It needs us to be courageous. It needs us to try something new. And so I think there's lots of areas of growth, and I am confident that if this passes, the committee will be able to do that with the support of Council Cotter and all those who are much more well-versed in ad hoc committees than I. But it is a first step, and I think it's an important one that we take, and so I'd ask you to really consider the doors that we can open through this. Thanks.
I'll come to you, Council Cotter, and then to Trustee Oldfield.
Thank you, Chair Thatcher. Just a couple of comments I wanted to pick up on, just so to make sure that there's no gap in what the movers want to achieve and what I think is set out. So, in particular, Trustee Oldfield, you indicated that the committee can set the terms of reference. I think that's correct. I mean, they can come back and make a recommendation, but that has to be included in your motion. So you would, in other words, you would say the committee, if the committee is established, you should say the committee should consider terms of reference and come back with a recommendation. That's section 4.6.1 of the bylaws. Otherwise, the board has to set all the terms of reference when it establishes the committee. So I think that's one point I would point out. In terms of the membership, I would also point out that by designating all trustees as members, that will affect quorum. So you're quite correct that membership is not, attendance is not mandatory, but if you don't have an opt-out for somebody who doesn't want to be part of the committee, then their numbers will be counted against quorum. So you may not be able to proceed with the meeting if you don't have quorum based on overall numbers. So that's something I think as well to consider. On the issue of privacy, the one thing I would note is that, and this is something that if the committee's established, we can work out as we go. But anonymization may not be enough. If we have, for example, an EA who only has one student in the class, and so that student can be identified even if it's anonymous, that's going to be an issue that we'll have to deal with as we go. So just another thing I put on the table.
Council Cotter, I'm just wondering if you could clarify something in terms of this procedure and the process. Now, with the terms of reference, in the past, we have struck the committee and then elected the chair and vice chair of the committee, who then create the terms of reference. Now, I'm just wondering if there's some change to that. I know on occasion it's been covered in our bylaws. Example, the Governance and Policy Committee, that would be one example. We do have a lot of information in our bylaws here. I'm wondering if that would suffice as terms of reference, or just the question around any change to the way that we've done that in the past.
Well, yeah, thank you for the question. So I think, as I recall, we always did come back to the board for approval, although the committee was vested with sort of that discretion to go away and work out the terms of reference. So that basic framework has been enshrined into the bylaws. So what it says is that the board may, by resolution, seek the recommendation from the ad hoc committee on the appropriate terms of reference. So in other words, when you establish the committee, you say, and committee, please consider terms of reference and come back with a recommendation. So, but the board still needs to approve the terms of reference, but you're basically having the committee do it, and then the board would bless it if the board doesn't do it on first instance. So that's the process that's been enshrined. It's one or the other. Either the board sets it or the board says, but you should be in the resolution that, the board is delegating to the committee to come up with the recommendation on the terms of reference and to report back on proposed terms of reference.
Thank you. Trustee Oldfield.
I just wanted to go back to Trustee Cunningham's question about the language. I just want to point out that the motion reads, the purpose of this committee is for the purpose of information gathering, monitoring, and evaluating issues related to, but not limited to, incidents of violence, right? It's not about going in and sitting down and meeting with a bunch of people and hearing about their own specific instances of violence. That's not the intent of the committee. It's about discussing issues and gathering information related to some of those problems that we're experiencing. It's not for us to go out and talk to every individual and find out what their experience was. So I don't foresee having a number of students or parents coming in necessarily and talking about their specific incident. This is about engaging with school administrators, union representatives, senior staff. We've included student trustees, and depending on what the terms of reference are for the committee, they may go out and speak to other groups. That might be something that they decide that they may want to do. But certainly this language, in my mind, and I know, I helped draft it, but it's certainly not the intent to go out and start talking to individuals about the incidences that they've experienced one-on-one. So, because that seems to be the sense of what I'm hearing from people.
Trustee Oldfield, the director, I think, has a question around clarification of your comments. Go ahead, Director.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So I think, again, to just kind of identify some of the confusion, perhaps, as I sit and listen, we did hear from one trustee that the notion that reports are not sufficient, and it's important to hear lived experiences, which I think has put in people's minds the notion of engaging people in their told stories, which creates one kind of environment. But if then we're hearing another piece around the fact that the stories would be brought and not heard, then that creates a different understanding. So I think that there is some question here about what the architecture actually looks like. I think that the common piece is wanting to actually have the authentic experiences being a part of the discussion in the interest of looking at authentic solutions. But perhaps what has happened is that there are too many words in the motion, and perhaps if it were simplified, it then allows for the discussion around the terms of reference that would allow the architecture of how those stories are in fact tabled in a manner that is safe but authentic. Because I think I'm hearing two different approaches around what that authenticity would look like. But what I think we're hearing is a common feature around wanting the authenticity of lived experiences being a part of a discussion in the interest of improvement. The other piece is the clarification of the difference between a committee comprised of all trustees and a committee available to all trustees. And so I think that there's a language piece here that again has confounded some of the conversation. So those are just some observations that may assist in helping to untangle where it is that this can go to achieve the goal that is being sought.
We can go to Trustee Edwards for her comment and then come back. Go ahead, Trustee Edwards.
Thank you, and certainly those are some of the things that Director Williams-Taylor sort of alluded to that kind of has me in mixed, although I somewhat understand what the purpose of is, I still don't know what it is, because if you want to get authentic community input or whatever, or experience whatever, I can give you an example. Around when we first started our looking at creating our equity and diversity strategic plan, one of the things that the board had decided to do at the time was to do a community consultation, and that the consultation part was to learn about the impact of our practices and structures on the staff, students, and partners in our community members in order to identify areas of strengths and areas where we need to grow and improve in order to enhance our services, improve outcomes for, in that particular case, racialized students within the DDSB. So the purpose was there is what the consultation was, and then that went back to the working group, and the working group took that information that was gathered and then determined some of the objectives or whatever of the equity and diversity at the time ad hoc committee. So it's really the wording that has me a little bit difficult. Like just an example as far as that when we created we actually had created an incident ad hoc committee back in November of 2017. And that motion basically said that an ad hoc committee would be established in order to prepare a response. So those are the two recent presentations on reporting of violent incidents. It was necessary to study the implications and impact and present legislation and policy and the impact on present legislation and policy before responding to the public. And then we also put in there that it should be a full board committee with the objective to report to the board so that we actually turn. But there was basically a set, because an ad hoc committee should basically, as I think Councillor Cotter said, is that it has really two functions. One is to investigate, and the second, or it can be to basically put in the steps of actions or the pros in order to carry out a resolution, sort of the working group of it. So I'm really having difficulties the way it's worded with several of the wording in order to actually come up what the purpose was. The purpose is solely, because we do have two mixed comments that are coming
Trustee Edwards,
forward.
do you have an amendment to the motion?
I can't, because it would be basically striking out the whole thing. I really think it needs a further discussion, and it could be simply as, in order to help this move forward, is developing basically, because again, there's the purpose, I'm not sure, is that developing an ad hoc committee that would look at, gathering the issues and coming back with recommendations around some of the things that we had similar around the equity committee. Again, it depends on when, and I'm getting two different opinions, so it would take too long. It would be striking out the whole thing, and I can't do that. Thank you.
Have you commented on this one? Going to go to student trustee Ben Cameron. Go ahead, Ben.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to suggest as an amendment the language that the director mentioned. There's kind of two parts that I think that.
Give us your amendment slowly then.
Yes, for sure.
Ben, and then we'll see if somebody will put it forward for you.
For sure. The start stays the same, that the Board of Trustees strike an ad hoc committee and then this is where it changed, available to all trustees, and then it continues on. And then I think the intent behind that is in the terms of reference, the committee could, figure out who its members are, or something like that. And then at the end of the report, just or at the end of the motion, sorry, I think it would just add that the committee shall create its preferred terms of reference and report back to the board for approval. Oh, do you want me to say that again? Sorry.
Back up a wee bit so Jillian can get that,
yeah.
If you wouldn't mind.
That the committee shall create its preferred terms of reference and report back to the board for approval.
Available to all trustees. Thank you. And then at the end, create preferred terms of reference and report back to the board for approval. Okay. Just wondering if there is a trustee who would like to put forward that amendment. Trustee Oldfield, and seconder, Trustee Pinillo. Is there any discussion to that amendment? Go ahead, Trustee Linton.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I don't want to lose Council Carter's point earlier, though, to the all trustees component. So I'm wondering if you could just take a minute to explain why the challenge with the all trustees as opposed in terms of like quorum and the meeting advancing. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Thatcher. I think this proposed amendment solves the problem, because then we would then, once the committee is, if this motion passes, then I think we would at some point just ask trustees to indicate whether they want to sit on the committee or not. This indicates that it's available, and then we can establish a number. If the number turns out to be 8, then we know our quorum is 5, instead of, if it says it's all, then we know our quorum has to be based on 12, so our quorum then would be 7. So the available to all, we will then get a number. If this passes, we will then get a number. Chair can ask, you know, who wants to sit on the committee, and then we'll have a number for quorum.
We're speaking to the amendment only, and I'll call on Trustee Cunningham.
Thank you. Speaking to the amendment, I don't think that it solves the problems that we were looking for in the original motion. So I would recommend against adopting this and going back and looking at some of the other wording that may be the problem, and potentially deferring the motion until we can work on a rewrite.
Thank you for that. Is there any further discussion to the amendment? Go ahead, Student Trustee Cameron.
Could I recommend that the first part be voted on around the available to all trustees, and then the second half? I don't know. I think that's...
Well, we're going to deal with the amendment that's here on the floor. We have an amendment that's moved and seconded. Trustee Brown?
Thank you, and through you, Chair, I'm just wondering, can I call the question? Because we seem to be going round. Is it time to call the question, or do I need to wait for this motion to be?
I'm happy to call the question, but you hadn't spoken to it. I wanted to make sure you had an opportunity.
Okay. Thank you. I'm good.
Okay. There's no further discussion. I will call the question, and the question then is on the amendment. We have an amendment. It's moved and seconded, and it appears up there on the screen. So I'm going to ask trustees, if you're in favor of the amendment, that's the green X. If you're opposed, the green check mark, or the red X. So I've got 1, 3, 4, 5, 6 opposed and 7 in favor. The motion carries. Oh, we had 7 in favor. 7 in favor. I believe that was what we had. I thought I counted from Jill.
Yep, student trustees.
Sit down, Carolyn, please.
Okay.
All right. Do you mind doing that again so I get the proper count here? I thought I counted. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 opposed. 4. Yeah, and 5 in favor. I'm sorry, my mistake. I was counting the student trustees' check marks, so that is defeated. So back to the main motion. As appears up on the screen here now, I'd like to call the question on the main motion. Green check mark or red X on the main motion now. Okay, 1, 2, 3 opposed. 6 in favor. Have I got that right? 2, 3 opposed, 4 opposed, and 6 in favor. I'm voting. Motion carries. Moving on in the agenda then, under information items, And I'm going to call on student trustees for their report. Student trustees who will begin tonight. Go ahead, Student Trustee Hewitt.
Thank you, Chair, and happy May. Today marks the start of Children's Mental Health Week. On Wednesday this week, we will encourage students, staff, and the community to shine green the color of mental health for mental health. We would like to give a big thank you to Disha Patel, Student Senator from O'Neill CVI, for leading this event. More information on Children's Mental Health Week can be found in the memo 2023-18, which is on page 86 and 87 of your package. Last Friday, we held the annual elementary leadership conference to talk with grade 7s and 8s about how to be better leaders. We hope everyone was able to take some ideas and skills away from the event. A special thank you to Aruba, Kenzie, and especially Isabella Robb for leading this event and providing leadership development for these young leaders. And last month, the incoming student trustees for the 2023-24 school year were elected. In Oshawa Whippy from Donald A. Wilson, Neha Kasuju, who is online right now, was elected to represent the East. In Uxbridge, Scugog Brock from Uxbridge Secondary School, Jetlyn Nobes was acclaimed. And last but not least, in Pickering Ajax from Dunbarton High School, coming back for a second term, student trustee Ben Cameron was re-elected. Yeah, we can clap for that. We can. The two new student trustees are joining us virtually tonight, and hopefully we will be meeting them in person soon.
Thank you, Chair. From May 18th to 21st, we, along with the incoming student trustees, will be attending Osta ACO's AGM. We are excited to meet all the incoming student trustees from across the province and elect a new executive council, learn, hear from speakers, and prepare for the upcoming school year. Finally, we would like to express our support for keeping books in libraries and available to students. A rich collection of books are essential to a free, diverse, and inclusive education and society. Removing them does nothing but impair students' exploration and education. Chair, that is our May report.
Thank you very much, and we're looking forward to welcoming the new trustees. Thank you for that. Moving on to 8B, and the Associate Director, Jim Markowski, for the opioid poisoning and naloxone report.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Thatcher, the report can be found on page 80 of your package. The purpose of the report this evening is to follow up on previous input that was shared by trustees surrounding the accessibility of naloxone at DDSB sites, and sharing a proactive emergency naloxone program we have put in place. Naloxone is a drug that can temporarily reverse the effects of an opioid overdose. It is injected into a muscle or given as a nasal spray, and generally considered safe for everyone unless an individual has an allergy specific to naloxone. Durham Region Health Department is actively involved in the monitoring and prevention strategies of opioid overdoses. They follow the Ministry of Health's direction and do not provide naloxone kits to Ontario school boards, as statistics indicate that the risk of an opioid-related poisoning in a secondary school is relatively low. DRHD, our local public health unit, places focus on programs aimed at prevention and the improvement of mental health and well-being among students. The Occupational Health and Safety Act, Bill 88, requires employers to have naloxone kits and programs for their use in workplaces deemed to be potentially high risk. As an example of this, it might include a workplace where a worker has voluntarily disclosed their use of opioids or where an opioid overdose has already taken place. The DDSB People and Culture Department provides support to staff with substance use disabilities and addictions. To our knowledge, we have not had an opioid overdose in one of our sites or are aware of any staff who may require support, and as a result, we would be in full compliance of the expectations set out through Bill 88. That all being said, we recognize that the requirements outlined in Bill 88 can be applied as a best practice and a proactive measure to enhance DDSB's emergency response and first aid program. And as a result, we will be implementing a new naloxone emergency program where kits will be provided to all DDSB sites. I will note that we've shared this program with DRHD and there was no concerns expressed on their end. The cost to provide kits to each site is approximately $22,500, and as naloxone kits expire every 3 years, There will be an ongoing cost to maintaining kits. As part of the implementation of the program, a new naloxone emergency program procedure will be shared with staff by June 30th of this school year, and we will provide training to administrators and first aid trained emergency responders with an aim of a full implementation on September 1st, 2023. Attached to this report for your information are also some fact sheets on opioid poisoning and naloxone. That is the end of our report. We'd be happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions for Associate Director Markovsky on this information item? Chair Edwards, go ahead.
Thank you, and I appreciate that you've gone through and going through. Just a clarification on the costs, because at one point you said that like it is a requirement under the work and health and safety. So are the costs of those kits going to be covered through our grants for student needs or under another grant, or is it something that we have to get out of our health and safety budget?
So thank you, and through you. So in situations where we are aware there's a need, Trustee Edwards, we would be required to have a naloxone kit on site. So we're not aware of that anywhere. So these would be under our discretionary funds. We would need to allocate $22,500 to ensure that every work site or school site has a naloxone kit.
Thank you. I'm seeing no further questions. We see one here. Go ahead, Trustee Linton.
Not a question, just thank you so much for taking the time, looking into this, and being proactive in this approach. If one naloxone kit saves one life over the next years, that is testament to these types of conversations. So thank you for your work on this, Director Markovsky.
Thank you, Associate Director Markovsky, and your team for the work on that particular program.
I just want to, if I may, recognize that we do have two members here that have been here and have been quite instrumental in developing this plan. So I do want to thank Dan Hogan and Carrie Stewart, our employees, for their support.
Thank you to you all. I'm seeing no further questions, so I will go to item C on the report and on your agenda, and I will call on Trustee Cunningham for the OPSPA report.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, the OPSPA report tonight will be given by Trustee Oldfield.
Thank you, Trustee Oldfield.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, I attended the OPSPA Board of Directors meeting this past weekend along with Trustee Edwards. The majority of the discussions over the weekend were around the GSN, the Grants for Student Needs, and Bill 98. OPSPA is in the process of reviewing the 2023-24 GSNs, but some highlights, and maybe highlights not the right word because that sort of implies something good, but there were a couple of things that stood out for me, and one of them was that the funding for Indigenous education is being realigned for next year, reducing the overall grant amount for a number of school boards, and the realignment includes reducing grant funding from Indigenous education credits and moving grant funding into the board action plan. There are no COVID recovery funds, and I guess this is a positive. The student transportation grant is projected to be $1.23 billion. And that is for transportation, for home-to-school transportation, reallocation of funds based on the number of routes the ministry has established. There is a $23 per hour funding to help recruit and retain drivers. But of course, whether that translates into $23 an hour for drivers depends on the operator needs. If they need more drivers than that, then the money could be divided amongst more drivers, thereby reducing the overall amount per hour. But those were just some of the highlights. Trustee Edwards may have some others. Certainly, that's just a brief couple of points on the GSNs. There also was, OPSPA is doing an advocacy day, Take Your MPP to School, that's May 23rd to 26th. Trustees should have received an email from me with the information about inviting your MPP to attend, take 2 or 3 hours to do school visits with your MPP. I'm sure they're eagerly awaiting a call or email from you because they are aware that this has gone out to MPPs, so they are aware. And then Bill 98, Better Schools and Student Outcomes Act. There was quite a lot of discussion over the weekend. There are a lot of unanswered questions right now, but OPSPA is drafting a response to Bill 98 and will be submitting their request to make submissions in person at the public hearings. The deadline for submissions for the public hearing is May 9th. You know, it's unfortunate that it is a short turnaround time. The provincial government hasn't provided boards with much time to review and to be able to draft submissions, but OPSPA has asked individual boards to make submissions by email, and accordingly, Chair, I move a motion that the board prepare a written submission to the public hearings on Bill 98, expressing the board's concerns on the proposed legislation to be submitted prior to the May 9th, 2023 deadline.
Looking for a seconder. Thank you, Trustee Edwards. So we have a motion on the floor around Bill 98 and a communication to be sent with our feedback. Is there any discussion around that?
Madam Chair, may I?
Go ahead, Associate Director.
Thank you very kindly. Bill 98 is a very broad piece of legislation. It impacts just about everybody. Trustees, certainly, the role of trustees, some of the decision-making that has historically been in the world of trustees would perhaps be moving based on the legislation, impact on the director, impact from a finance standpoint. It's super broad, and so not trying to dissuade you, I'm just saying that usually staff can provide quite a bit of support in drafting these communications and the feedback. Because there's so much that impacts trustees directly, just would like to suggest that trustees would really need to engage in what that feedback would be. Certainly using OPSPA's feedback perhaps as a template or a starting point, but there is quite a bit of trustee-specific stuff in there, and so we're happy to support with the operational side and provide our feedback on the impacts of the proposed operational pieces of the legislation, but there are quite a few governance pieces as well.
Trustee Oldfield?
I think that's great. If staff are going to draft it, we can add to that the governance piece, and certainly we can talk amongst ourselves, and I'm sure that that would all go through Chair Edwards to be able to do that. And I think that's a great start if you provide us with your draft, and we can add to that.
And sorry, Trustee Oldfield, I don't recall what the timeline is for that to be sent in.
May 9th.
Respectfully, that it'll be difficult to provide comprehensive feedback by May 9th. We'll certainly do our best.
Okay. Trustee Oldfield?
No, I just want to say I recognize that it is a tight turnaround. I just want to point out, you know, that is the government's intent, so whatever we can do to facilitate that so that we don't play into their plan would be, you know, much appreciated.
Associate Director Wright, are you suggesting just a minor change to that motion to include staff?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to highlight that trustee perspective on the governance pieces is going to be required to just for effective feedback from your perspective. We wouldn't want to speak on your behalf.
Okay. All right. So we have a motion on the floor. It's moved and seconded. I'm going to call the question. All in favor? That's the green check mark. All opposed? The red X. So I have all in favor? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think that's unanimous. Motion carries. Okay. We have 2 memos here, and I'd like to thank the director and staff for bringing forward the item B around learning resource selection policy and process, because I know that a number of trustees wanted to have the opportunity to have some discussion around that. So I'm going to move then to item B, unless there's some discussion. I believe we have discussed the mental health piece on a number of occasions this evening. Is there any further discussion around that? Okay, so let's go then to the learning resource selection policy and process. And this is an opportunity now for trustees to maybe speak to some of the feedback that we've had from parents in emails and some questions that we might have. I believe staff could help us with that. Go ahead. I'm going to call on Trustee Michelle Arsenault. Go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. After receiving multiple calls, emails, and just speaking with parents in schools and other functions, this has to be something that we talk about. The resources that we have in school is having a serious impact to a lot of children and parents. And I know that lots of people come here every week and they want to know about what books are in the schools, where, what's in these books, what are the titles, so they can search them themselves. I did myself look at the Sora online library, but without knowing the titles of the book, it can be difficult to find. I had to do my own research to find certain books. And I think that's what some of the parents were having problems finding the books, because they don't know all of the names and titles to them. And the ones that we could find, I mean, this is an uncomfortable topic, but it does have to be a topic that we talk about, because it is upsetting a lot of people. And we want to do the right thing by our children, especially elementary school children. And tonight, I'm hoping that this is a good conversation to helping a lot of children and parents with this situation.
Thank you, Trustee Arsenault. Calling on Trustee Brown.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I did note in the memo that the last time any of these books were reviewed was last spring, so I'm assuming that we're due a review as it is an annual review. So that's the first thing I did take note on the memo. And also I also want to thank all the parents that have emailed. I've tried to answer as many as possible, but we're here today. I feel just the same way as Trustee Arsenault here, that as a trustee, we want you to know that we hear you. And we are going to try and do whatever we can to make sure that you know that you've been heard. And I feel that's really, really important, especially, I know I'm a parent, I want answers too. So coming back to that, if you hopefully get other people to also read the memo, there is a resource selection procedure. And if you have those names of those books that you're uncomfortable with, or you don't like, or you don't want your children, submit the form. The more people that submit the forms is the more that people will take notice. We've all taken notice of all the emails. Don't think that we haven't answered them all. There's hundreds. So we are fully aware of what is going on out there in the schools. And like Michelle, I really hope that we have a really good discussion about this today, because it's obviously it's a concern. I'm concerned, and I'm concerned as a parent. And it's not just that, it's more, I would like to have a discussion about the review and how we categorize certain books. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to be excluded. It just means I would like to know how is it categorized. And if as there is already a process in place of how these books are reviewed, we need to be reviewing some more. Or maybe we need to look at, it says up to or more than, I think it says. So we can review more than once a year, maybe twice a year, if this is the issue. So that's it. Thank you.
Associate Director Markovsky, I'm wondering if you would like to speak to some of the procedure that is in the report here.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Thatcher. And I guess I'll just build on Trustee Arsenault and Trustees Brown's comments in terms of what takes place in relation to the reviewing of books, how it is that books are introduced to in our schools, how it is that they're reviewed. And we recognize that there's many layers to this conversation. Naturally, teacher librarians do work with their school administration and their school staff to introduce new books within the school circulation or distribution model. We've listed within the report that there's a variety of resources that they will use to develop, I guess you could say, a plan in terms of the age appropriateness of the book. So there are naturally, the publisher will give recommendations in terms of age appropriateness. There's a variety of other, the Canadian School Libraries Association, the Ontario Library Association, Common Sense Media. So there's a variety of resources that they will utilize to run what I would say a review in terms of the appropriateness of the book for certain age groups. Based on that review, then the book would be placed in the proper category. I can share, for example, I know there's much discussion in elementary schools that oftentimes that if a book is seen to be, mature themes, perhaps contain some level of sexual content, it will be placed in the library under the young adult section, which would only be accessible to grade 7s and 8s. So there's practices that are in place at the school level, again, guided through the teacher librarian, that would ultimately help sort of create a structure in terms of accessibility of books. That all being said, I want to recognize that we don't always get it right. Hence why there is a policy and a procedure that helps inform how it is that we review books. One of the natural occurrences that when a family member or a student or a member of the community is identified here as a stakeholder within the procedure, comes forward and identifies a concern with a book, we engage in what we call an informal review. So the teacher librarian or the principal will consult with our teacher librarian facilitator and our central staff. The book will be reviewed, it will be read, and based on that, a recommendation on how we proceed moves forward. If the individual who casts the informal review is not happy with the outcome, to what Trustee Brown alluded to earlier, there is a form that the individual can complete, and at which point we would move forward to a formal review of the resource. A committee is struck, as you'll see that there is a structure that's in place in terms of how it is that the book is reviewed, and then ultimately the outcome of that review through that formal structure will inform how it is that we move forward as a system. I want to recognize that there are various layers and intersections to this conversation. I do want to acknowledge, too, that I recognize that the role of teacher librarians is very instrumental in reviewing the resources that we have. And there are structures in place, and I would actually encourage trustees, similar to what Trustee Brown said, that if there are families that are reaching out to you, refer them to our procedure. There's ways that we can engage in review of books. And based on whether it's an informal or it moves to a formal review, the outcome of that will help inform how it is that we move forward. I'll stress that in terms of just general points, but happy to answer any specific questions as well.
At this point, I need a mover and a seconder. At 10 o'clock, we need to put a motion forward to extend the meeting to 10:30. So I'm looking for a mover Trustee Cunningham, and seconder, Trustee Arsenal. All in favor of extending the meeting to 10:30? Show of hands is good. Okay, motion carries. Going to Ben Cameron. Go ahead, Ben.
Thank you, Chair. I am very happy with our policy and procedure on this. I don't think it's our job as the Board of Trustees to pick through every book in a library. I don't think that's parents' jobs either. I think usually keeping books in classes, or in libraries, sorry, are good for students. And even if a book is uncomfortable, often that's the time that books should be in libraries. And there's not a lot of instances where a book being in a library, I don't think, is harming students. It's opening people up to different perspectives and different lived experiences that can help people grow and understand themselves. And it's really important to keep our libraries open and books in those libraries. Thank you.
Trustee Cunningham, go ahead. Emma.
Thank you. I'm also happy that there is this review process, but respectfully, I feel that there is a step missing. I did read Genderqueer myself, as well as reading the case study about it. And I'll admit that I was conflicted. When I read the book, I thought it was an extremely valuable resource for someone, either themselves or learning about non-binary and asexual identities. I thought it was wonderful for that. But there was extremely sexually explicit images in that. And I do see a difference between a school library and a public library. And so to me, the step that's missing from the review is there an alternate book that would fill this need? I wouldn't want to take something like Genderqueer away from that community if we didn't have something in place to plug that hole. And so when someone is coming to us with something that's concerning, I think it's worth asking, is there another way at this? Going back to those teacher librarians and saying, is there another book that will give these students what they need without this concerning part to it? And if the answer is no, then the answer is no. But sometimes it might be yes, and we could make that swap without taking away any of the things that students need to get out of that story.
Thank you. Trustee Panillo?
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I'm very conflicted listening to discussion because if I take a step back and remove myself from this particular book that we're talking about, as an example, I think we wade into dangerous territory. And I say that because as someone who's openly queer, this was not a book that I had on my shelves, but I can promise you that there were other things that I was reading that might have been a little old for me at the time, in hindsight, but I really valued the relationship that I had with the librarian at my elementary school, who made sure that she was challenging me in certain ways and also directing me in areas where I might be interested and I might not. I understand that not every student in every school might have that same experience, but what we run the risk of doing is imitating what's happening in America right now with their book bans. And I don't raise this lightly because we all just read the report that said Indigenous Two-Spirit and 2S LGBTQI plus students especially do not feel safe in schools. So if you sit with that for a moment and then you sit with this process, which is a fair process and which sets out annual guidelines because yes, things change year to year, and you then say, we're going to remove this book, we'll give them something else that represents them, perhaps, but we're going to remove this book because it makes some uncomfortable. But if you are that student who this is the first book that you pick up that talks about being queer, that's going to be a gateway for you, and that's going to be life-changing. And if we take this book away, then there's nothing to say that groups of homophobic, transphobic individuals in our communities across our nation, which we know they exist, aren't going to spam these types of review systems to have things that they don't like removed in the public system. And that is what I fear, because it's not just going to be 2S LGBTQIA plus content. then it's going to move into certain religions that they don't agree with. It's going to move into certain ethnic groups. We've already seen attempts at Black authors just last year following George Floyd, when you would think support would be highest for Black, Afro, and Caribbean people. It was not. And so there's really no stopping. It goes back to that first they came for poem. So I'm very, very hesitant for us to insert ourselves into a process which is laid out for communities, for students, for parents, for anyone to participate in, to have themselves heard, but ultimately it's at arm's length from us, and it's by a panel of people who are working at that level every day and understanding the complexities of what students are interacting with online, on social media, what they're seeing on the internet, the impacts that that has, and the questions that it raises. And so I caution this because we get into very dangerous territory, and I don't think there's anything wrong with being concerned about how we categorize things and when people are being exposed to things. Okay, let me clarify that. I do think there's an issue if we start banning books broadly and circumvent this process that has been laid out fairly and equitably for everyone to partake in. You don't have to agree with it, but that is for you and your child, your student, to have a conversation about, and not necessarily for us to go in and intervene. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Trustee Miller, and then I'll come back to Trustee Arsenault. Go ahead, Kelly.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Just listening around the room and considering all the concerns that have been brought forward by parents and the community, I do believe it is my duty and our duty to make a very clear and conscious response. To me, it sounds clear that the parents would like a review, and as a duty bearer, I do have the duty to respond to their requests. I do, at this point, believe that considering the items that Emma had brought up, that there could be considerations for alternatives. But my concern, coming from the background of child protection and safety, we just had a presentation prior to regarding, we had a presentation about school safety. When it comes to the vulnerability of children, and we know from reports from the Canadian Centre of Child Protection that children do not always have the language to understand what they're exposed to or what has happened to them. Under those concepts, I am at the decision that we should be reviewing this book as soon as possible. And I also want to ask this question: when did it become acceptable for us to ignore the vulnerability of students or to have sexually explicit content? I do not have any concerns with information, material, education for all students that require information about their identity. That is a part of our, we need that in our school system. We see the diversity, we are existing in this current time, so we're not gonna be blind to the needs. But however, again, when it comes to the vulnerability, I will not accept and I will not agree with explicit sexual content for children to be exposed to under the umbrella of information items. And that is all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Arsenault.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I am with Trustee Miller. These books have upset me. I've looked at them, I've researched them, I did my part. I don't know if everybody else has, but when we're talking about young children, impressionable children, and the things that we need to protect them. This book has these, and I want to stop saying this book. There's lots of books that we need to review. It's not one book, and it's not the gender, it's not anything like that. It's exactly what Trustee Miller said. It's sexually explicit, okay? We don't see that in children movies. We don't see that anywhere on children anything for children, if there are parents that want their children to know certain things, I feel as if those parents should buy that for their child. I don't believe that we have the right to just put it out there and say, well, it's information. I don't believe that that's the right thing for children. I really do not. I think that's harmful because there, as you can see, people who come and all of the emails that we've been flooded with for weeks on end, there's a lot of people for a lot of different reasons very upset about these books. We can't be casual about them. We can't. These are their children. As my child goes to an elementary school, and I would like to teach her what I feel that she needs to know when she needs to know it. Just like these other, it's not to say they won't teach them. I'm not going to speak for them, but I feel like they need to do that. Not a book in a library to be shared and children having fun with it because they're young. They're not understanding. And I think if we keep saying they understand, some, maybe, but not all. Thank you.
Go ahead,
Thank you.
Gwen.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I want to start by prefacing that we're here to represent students. And those students, as you all know, those students are the people who are accessing these books, which make them the most important stakeholder in this situation. So I'll say that, well, Director Markovsky mentioned that these books become accessible in the YA section in grades 7 and 8 and beyond. Kids are having sex at that age. And I'm saying that as a representative of students, and from what I know, kids are having sex at that age. So to read about that, I don't think is that obscure. There are many other titles, many of which are straight books about straight sexual relationships that are equally as explicit. And we don't talk about those. It becomes an issue when there's a topic raised about a title that interferes with transgender peoples and homosexual intercourse. And I wanted to touch on a point made by trustees earlier about for some that may be able to understand this type of content at a more mature, who are at a more mature level, and those trustees recommending that students go to their parents for these sorts of titles. I just think that would be very uncomfortable as a student to speak to your parent, especially if you're not out yet, to ask your parent to read content about how sexual relationships work if you're going to be in a homosexual relationship of any sort. And I think that we need to still remember that if we're talking about safety, some kids might not feel safe at home to come out and ask for those sorts of resources. So that is a huge aspect of safety on our students' part as well. Thank you.
Student trustee Van Cameron, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to mention that if students don't want to read a book, they can put it down. Right? We are not forcing kids to read these books. And I think the language that we are using around this table is dangerous and sounds to me a lot like people who advocate for abstinence education. And I don't think that that's what we want. And I would like to reiterate what Trustee Hewitt said, that kids are having sex. The experiences in these books are experiences of real people that go through these situations. And as a queer person that was terrified to come out of the closet, my only representation in media was like Kurt from Glee, right? To have these books that, represent the queer and LGBTQ community is very powerful and liberating for queer students. And it's really, really important. And that we don't react to the angriest parents and the loudest parents, but that we listen to the people who benefit the most from these resources, and not the people who can just put the book down if they don't want to read it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Go ahead, Trustee Brown, your last speaker for the evening.
Thank you again, and through you, Chair. I just want to reiterate, one of the things, this is not about what type of sex someone's having. I'll just put it out there. I'm quite good with my English literature. The kind of books I'm talking about is called erotica. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that on live YouTube, but that's what it's called, erotica. I personally don't want to see any erotica for children. And what I mean by children, I'm talking about children that are 5, 6, maybe up to high school. It says here in the policy, age appropriateness must be considered. Well, erotica is not actually considered for any child, because even on TV it says, please watch with caution. This may contain violence and sexual content. You get a warning. So I don't care what type of sex it is. It's erotica. That's my concern. I don't care who's having the sex. I don't think it should be in schools. That's my personal opinion. And I've agreed with a lot of the parents. And I know that the justification in this memo was used, a book that was used, Genderqueer, is that right? Was used as the example. That's not the only book. We do know there's a load of books that need to be looked at. And end of the day, this in particular for this memo, that was the one that was highlighted. I didn't put that there. I'm just saying that this is not about what type of sex someone's having. It's about the fact that the book is erotica. And I'm kind of glad I had that as a last say, because that's my concern. Because in a bookshop, an adult bookshop or a bookshop, there is a section called erotica. You can go over there and buy books about sex and having sex in different ways. I know nobody wants to say it, but I'll say it. I think I see those books that I've read is erotica. And I think it has no place in school. Maybe in high school, but again, that comes to age appropriateness. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Trustee Oldfield hasn't spoken to this, so I actually want to go to her.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think this is good debate. I am incredibly hesitant to get in the business of reviewing books and making decisions based on my own personal opinion, because that's what it would be. Right? I'm not qualified. I don't think anyone around this table is qualified to make a determination about what's age appropriate and what's not. I have had concern about the books, the emails, the concerns around the books, because I haven't seen anyone come forward talking about sexually explicit books as related to what I'd say is straight sex. And there's nobody more sexualized in society than women for straight sex. So I really am concerned, and maybe it's true that this isn't an issue that is directed at to us LGBTQ plus community, but it sure looks like that. I haven't seen anything else, and I don't know how are we gonna look at all the books? Are we gonna look at every book and determine what's sexually explicit? Is there a process for that? Because if we're gonna do this, if we're gonna review books and say there is no erotica or sexually explicit books, then we better look at all of them and not target a community. And I think it's a very slippery slope, because the next time there's a delegation of the board talking about, Trustee Pinello mentioned this, I don't like this particular religion. That goes against my beliefs. I mean, then what? Do we screen that? Are we not gonna be open to people being able to read about different religions, different beliefs? It's a very slippery slope for me, and I personally don't feel that I am qualified to make a determination about these books. I think that the process that we have in place is a good process, that we are reviewing books, that there is a procedure, and I hate to be reactive to a few people, and honestly, getting 10 emails is a few people. When you look at the number of students that attend our schools and the number of families that are out there, it is a small number of very vocal people. That is not enough for me to sway my opinion. What about all the people that are sitting there quite happy and not saying anything? What about all the families that have gay, trans students, children? You know, I really, it is a great debate. I know it's a difficult issue. I know we're all uncomfortable with talking about sex, and that, you know, we heard from a student trustee talking about how grade 7 and 8s are having sex. Should they be? Probably not. Are they? They are. You know, so that makes a lot of parents uncomfortable. Parents are uncomfortable with the fact their children are having sex. Parents are uncomfortable with the fact that their children may be gay. You know, that is why it's important to have information out there, because there has to be a place for children to go when it's not necessarily something they can do at home. Should they be able to? Certainly they should, but that's not the reality in a lot of homes.
Thank you, Trustee Oldfield, and I'm going to go to Director Williams-Taylor.
Thank you, through you, Chair. It's certainly a very complex issue, and we've really tried to present for you in the memo the fact that because it is a complex issue, a board policy and procedure was created. The example given in the memo is a case study that tells you about how it is that books are reviewed, that include the voices of people who experience the book as well as trustees. The other piece is that sometimes when we see snippets and excerpts that are taken and photographs that are shown out of the context of the whole story, we then draw some conclusions. And I have to admit, I reacted similarly when I saw some of the images and the pictures that were being argued about. But then I did go and read the book, and I set some time aside with our library leaders, and we actually did do an exploration of the difference. What is the definition of pornography? What is the definition of erotica? And what is simply sexual content? And they are not the same. And so understanding purpose and intent is the question. I have never had any kind of resistance to students going on a trip to see the David statue by Michelangelo. We see that there are nudes that are presented to students in a variety of contexts, but yet I have never had any kind of pushback on those pieces. In preparation for the conversation tonight, I also did some review on books that have caused consternation and have caused review. In this very room, 20 years ago, Harry Potter was the subject of vitriolic response by the community in the Durham District School Board because it was claimed that it represented witchcraft. We also, if you look at any of the books that are recently under question and in controversy in Canada, The Handmaid's Tale is one of those books. Underground to Canada is one of those books. Of Mice and Men is one of those books. The Wars by Timothy Finley is one of those books. The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz is one of those books. And currently, The Hate You Give is currently under question by some individuals who have a challenge around some of the conversations. So that said, I'm not going to say to you, and I could carry on, but I'm not going to say to you that it is an easy conversation. And this is why it is important to have a process that allows us to undertake, discuss, read the context and the full text in full, and to make some determinations about what it is that these representations, these images mean. What is the purpose of the text? How is the text used? How is the text accessed? And I can tell you there are things that I read or am exposed to that make me very uncomfortable. My family is shocked that I will get up and walk out of a movie I've paid for. But if there are things that make me uncomfortable, I will leave them, but I do recognize that I can't simply cut off people's access to them. So I leave it with you to consider the fact that we do have a policy that was passed by the Board of Trustees, that trustees sit as a part of the review process, but to undertake to examine every resource that is available to every student, we have 77,000 of them, is an unreasonable undertaking. So with your indulgence, Chair, that's my comment on the matter.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you all, trustees, for your comments this evening. As there is no further business, this meeting is now adjourned.
Good evening. We are calling to order the special board meeting of Monday, May 8th that was supposed to 8 o'clock, but it is now 10:35. And so I'm calling this meeting to order. And as a settler and in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, I do want to give the land acknowledgement. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school boards and schools are located. Today, this area is a home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territories of the Mississaugas, the Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, learn, and live. Are there any declarations of interest? Hearing none, there's no declaration that we have the adoption of the agenda. We have one item on the agenda. Trustee Cunningham, Trustee Brown, all those in favor? Any opposed? That agenda is carried. We have one recommended action as far as the adoption of a resolution that was just at the standing committee meeting, and I will pass it on to Trustee Thatcher.
I move that the board now adopt the resolution and approve the actions of the May 1st, 2023 Standing Committee meeting.
Seconded by Trustee Brown. All those in favor? Opposed? That motion carries. As that is the only item on our special, I now call this meeting adjourned. Thank you.